Okay, we are back for another Friday live call-in show. How is everyone doing today? Hope you guys had a good week, and we've got a lot of news to get to. So let's welcome everybody to our live stream wherever you are in the world. We've got a global audience. We've got people joining us from everywhere, I am certain. But today we're going to have to really jump into it, Alexander, and get straight to the news because we have a lot of news, a lot of breaking news, specifically one story which you would like to touch upon before we get to our main story, which is what's going on in Ukraine, what's going on with Ukraine and Russia, what's going on in the Donbass, what's going on between NATO and Ukraine, the Biden family and Ukraine. We've got some photos, Alexander, from the Daily Mail, which, they don't present Hunter Biden in the best of light. Why do I bring up Hunter Biden? Well, he is also connected to Ukraine, and many people in the deep state, many Democrats would like us to forget about Hunter Biden and Joe Biden's exploits in Ukraine, Devin Archer, John Kerry, and all the things that they were up to in Ukraine in 2014, because it all ties together as to why we are where we are. At the end of the day, Alexander, my hunch is that this is all about money. Nord Stream 2, all about the IMF, the ransacking of Ukraine, money laundering, and all those things. And that is why we are where we are today. But before we get started, Alexander, how are you doing in London, the Oracle of London? Alexander McCurris, how are you?
Absolutely brilliantly well, I have to say, and it's always a great joy to appear on live streams as we're doing today. And as you rightly say, we're packed with news. London, of course, is full of talk about the death of Prince Philip, the Duke of Edinburgh, the Queen's husband. Apparently, it's not going to be a major royal funeral. I didn't think it would be, actually. But he has been married to the Queen, I understand, for 73 years, which is quite remarkable, quite a remarkably long marriage and partnership. And of course, for the Queen, this is going to be a devastating thing. She's now 95. She's almost certainly going to miss desperately the person that she was married to for all those long years, even though their marriage has had its moments. I mean, it wasn't always easy with them, but they stuck it through. They were always together, and they formed in the end a pretty remarkable partnership. And I would like to say a few things about that. But generally, very happy to be again on this program, discussing all these important topics and interacting with our viewers, with our Duran community over the course of this program.
So rest in peace, Prince Philip, absolutely. And welcome to everybody, wherever you're joining us from. Hit that like, everybody, as you enter the building. Hitting that like takes 1.62 seconds, I think, last time I timed it. But hit that like. Share this channel with everybody you know. Let's get this video out there because YouTube will definitely not help this video get any exposure. So we need your help. Wherever you are in the world, United States, Canada, Russia, Serbia, Bulgaria, the Republic of Ireland, South Africa, Australia, New Zealand, wherever you are, Egypt, where else? Nigeria, Sweden, Greece, Slovakia, where else? Let's see real quick. We'll do a real quick around the world. Serbia, Croatia, Netherlands, Canada, UK. Alexander, the UK. Some words about Prince Philip.
Yes, I mean, as I said, he married the Queen in 1948. That is an extraordinarily different time from today. When he married the Queen, Britain was still an empire. It still just ruled India. India became independent that year. It ruled vast areas of Africa. It was the major power in the Middle East. It's extraordinary to think this, but this was still a time when the sun never set on the British Empire as it still existed. He was a member of the Greek royal family. He'd been exiled from his home when he was young. He'd lived an extraordinary, varied, and very difficult life as a child, going from one place to another. He ended up in Britain. He joined the Royal Navy. He excelled at the Royal Navy, and that was clearly going to be his life. He was by all accounts, an outstanding officer. He drove his men exceptionally hard. And the Queen met him on an inspection of the Naval College. She fell in love with him immediately. He was perhaps a little less sure initially whether he did want to marry her. He wasn't. He was clearly attracted to her very powerfully. It was, in fact, the fact that she would become queen that put him off marrying her. That I know for an absolute fact. He didn't marry her because she was going to become queen. He was nervous about the fact that she would become queen because he was very, very keen on developing his naval career, which would have ended quite possibly with him becoming an admiral, and he had a tremendous love of the sea. But in the end, they did marry. They had a extraordinarily productive and successful relationship and partnership. He was a man of enormous energy, tremendous drive, and I have I have an account of him from one person who met him during the early years of his marriage to the Queen, who was my mother, who was quite a socialite, and met him at a party in London where he was with his friends, and spoke to me often about it and said what an extraordinarily vital and physical person he was in some ways, a person of enormous physical drive and magnetism and tremendous intelligence and tremendous energy, much of which she felt was being frustrated by the fact that he was confined within the royal family and within the role that he had to assume as the Queen's husband. And yet he somehow managed to keep it together, and they were very loyal to each other, and they were very successful as a couple. Now, he did from time to time say extraordinary things. He could be phenomenally rude on occasion. He could be, bizarrely insulting on other occasions. I suspect that was a reflection of the enormous frustrated energy that he possessed and his feelings that he was being pushed into the background and not given a full scope for his abilities to, really express themselves. But overall, and when you look back on it, I mean, it was a most extraordinary and successful marriage. I don't think he was ever exactly a popular figure in Britain, but he was certainly a steadying force within the royal family and an example of somebody who put his duty to the Queen above his personal interests, which is such a contrast to the behavior of some of the younger members of the royal family today.
All right, very quickly, does he get a royal funeral? I mean, what's the next step? Is it going to be a royal funeral? Of course, Charles, of course, the royal family will attend. What about Harry? Would Harry attend?
Well, we'll see. Possibly not, but I'd suspect not, actually. And the word is at the moment, which is not yet be fully confirmed as I'm speaking, that it will actually be a private funeral, probably held in the Royal Chapel in Windsor, and that he'll be interred there. And it won't be a great state funeral as it was for the Queen Mother, and as it will be for the Queen herself when she passes away. He was actually an intensely private man. That's an aspect of him that isn't widely known. He seems to have been intimate with his immediate family, with the Queen and with Prince Charles, with whom he had also a rocky, but in the end, eventually very successful and close relationship. But he was not somebody who really cared much about pomp, ceremonies, great send-offs, state funerals, and anything of that kind. I don't think he would have wanted it, and I don't think that's what we'll see. But we'll see.
All right. Let's get into the main story, Alexander. Guys, I will be putting in the link for the call-in in about 20, 30 minutes. We've got the Discord server up and running. I will put a link for that as well, and I'll pin that to the top. And what else do I have to announce? Yes, I will be rolling the call-in channel where I put the call-in videos. I'll actually be rolling that into the main channel, to this Duran channel. So all the call-in shows from last week and this week, I'll pick some of the call-in shows, some of the calls, the ones that came out well, that had good audio, and I'll roll those into this channel as well. So we'll get a lot of videos on this Duran, this main channel. Of course, always look for Alexander's channel in the description box down below. Look for my demonetized channel in the description box down below. Valley S, the legend, Valley S comes in with a $20 super chat to kick things off. Thank you very much, Valley S. And we also have Brian. Brian is in the house with a €10 super chat to kick things off. Alexander, you've done a lot of videos on Ukraine. We've done a ton of videos on Ukraine. I feel like I've been reporting on Ukraine personally forever. I feel like I've become an expert on Ukraine and Russia, and I never thought I would become so intimately involved and knowledgeable about this situation. But there you have it. So we have Ukraine. The title of this stream is Ukraine Stuck in the Middle. It's a tug of war, and it really is a tug of war. And Ukraine is stuck in the middle. Of course, they're not innocently stuck in the middle. They did choose this path, not all of Ukraine, but a portion of the population during the Maidan in 2013, 2014 did choose this path. They were led to believe that they would be joining the European Union. At the time, I was a bit perplexed. I laughed about that because back then I thought to myself, in a couple of years, people are going to be wanting to get out of the Hotel California, Roach Motel, known as the European Union. But Ukraine is staging this Maidan protest, which turned into an Obama EU. Let's not forget that, a European Union Obama co-sponsored coup d'etat in Ukraine, and they turned that into a coup, which led to a war. And while so many countries were just beginning to think about exiting the European Union, eventually the UK did just that. Ukraine decided to tear their country apart in order to enter the European Union. The other day we had Turkish President Erdogan humiliate Ursula von der Leyen and Charles Michel, and I think that kind of expressed what the world thinks of the European Union. So Ukraine chose a path towards the EU, and here we are today with an EU that is the laughingstock of the entire world, and deservedly so. We have Ursula von der Leyen heading up the European Union. We have Charles Michel. We have a criminal in Christine Lagarde, a convicted criminal heading up the ECB. It is a complete shit show. But here we are on the brink of a war, all because of what happened in 2013, 2014, with this ridiculous Soros-sponsored, Obama-sponsored, European Union-sponsored coup d'etat and Maidan protest. Alexander, a couple of quick notes. Why is this happening now? Why is Ukraine happening now? Why is Navalny and all this Navalny stuff happening now? Why is all of this taking place? Is it Nord Stream 2? Are they trying everything in their power to derail Nord Stream 2? Hold on 1 second. Is it NATO? Is it the NATO grift? Is this all about justifying the presence of NATO, a grift, NATO, a corruption, a corruption organization, an organization that relies on the money for the United States? So they need a conflict in order to justify the cash that the American taxpayers are going to shovel over to NATO. Is this about Biden? Is this a distraction for a Sleepy Joe presidency, which is just going down the tubes in front of our eyes every single day? Is this about hiding all the Biden family corruption which took place in Ukraine? We talked about Hunter Biden when we opened up this show. We're all reminded as to what the Bidens were up to in Ukraine. Is this about Zelensky's ratings, Alexander? His approval ratings are in the freaking toilet. Is this about the Ukraine economy? The economy's in the toilet. Or is this just about neocon obsession with Russia? I gave you a lot to open it up with, but I think they're all good topics and reasons that you could touch upon.
Absolutely. And I think there is a part of all of that in this. I think there are three things that have basically created this situation. Firstly, there is the change of administration in Washington. There's the sense that exists in many places, including Ukraine, that the Biden-Harris administration, as we must now call it, is much more committed to supporting Ukraine if Ukraine starts a war in eastern Ukraine. And I think there is also some urging, some actual support from that from some people in Washington. I read regularly parts of the US media, and when I say the US media, I don't just mean the big newspapers, the New York Times, the Washington Post, those sort of places. Then what they write about Ukraine is scary enough. But even more scary are some of the kind of things you read on some of the sort of think tank connected neocon websites. And they're absolutely, demented in the kind of things they say. And they clearly want a war in the Donbass, and they clearly want some kind of massive confrontation between the US and Russia. And they're all about sending US military troops to Ukraine to scare Russia. And there's talk about redeploying an air mobile brigade that the US has in Italy to Western Ukraine, and sending the US fleet into the Black Sea and all that sort of thing. There's lots of talk like that from those sort of people. And of course, in Ukraine itself, that gets picked up and encourages the hardliners there to take an ever stronger position. So there is that. The other thing is, of course, there is the sense in Ukraine that the clock is ticking, and it's ticking downward. And one of the things that is alarming them is Nord Stream 2. And in fact, we've just had an interview by the Ukrainian Deputy Prime Minister, Alexei Reznikov, in the Wall Street Journal, in which he has said that Nord Stream 2 would be a disaster for Ukraine, and that Ukraine would be irreparably weakened if Russia and Germany complete Nord Stream 2. And he goes on to say that if that happens, Ukraine will lose all the funds that it gets because of the gas transit that through Ukraine. And of course, it would also mean that Russia would be in a position in the future to cut off Ukraine's access to Russian natural gas. So there is that fear, that concern that Nord Stream 2 may be completed. And there's also, I suspect, behind that, also always this concern within Ukraine itself that European and specifically German support for Ukraine is weakening, that the Europeans and especially the Germans and the French are heartily sick of the whole problem of Ukraine, that they feel deep down that they made a disastrous mistake in 2013, 2014 to try to push Ukraine into the EU, that all that has achieved is that it's landed them with a massive headache in Ukraine on their eastern border, and it's wrecked their relations with Russia. And there are very few people apparently in the EU, outside perhaps Warsaw and the Baltic states, who feel that they want to continue along that strategy. So there is that sense also. And then, of course, there is the internal problems within Ukraine itself. Firstly, we see that Zelensky's poll ratings have collapsed. The economy is in a very, very bad way. There's higher inflation. The pandemic crisis is out of control. And the leader, the secretary of Russia's Security Council, a very tough individual called Nikolai Patrushev, who is Putin's major international affairs advisor and advisor on his security policy. He has spoken at great length about the disastrous state of Ukraine's affairs. He's talked about how Ukraine basically now survives on loans from the West, how its industrial position has basically collapsed, how there is really little progress being made on developing Ukraine's economy, and how Ukraine is now even exporting samples of its black earth, its famous black earth, in order to provide opportunities to develop agriculture in other places. So there's been no real progress on Ukraine's economy. And there is a major political crisis also, because Zelensky is coming under constant pressure from the West to carry out all sorts of economic reforms in Ukraine, which are deeply unpopular within Ukraine itself. They're always spoken about as reforms which are intended to end corruption. But of course, they're really also about extending Western influence over Ukrainian assets. Now, this is encountering growing resistance. And one consequence of that is that Zelensky's position is becoming extremely difficult within Ukraine itself. He's not trusted by the hardliners, the nationalist hardliners within Ukraine. He's now opposed by many of the oligarchs. His government unraveled a few months ago. He's in battle with the Constitutional Court. And in light of all of this, he is under huge pressure to achieve some sort of breakthrough on some front. And I think all of these factors, the change of administration, the reinstatement of the neocons in Washington, the feeling that Nord Stream 2 is coming, the internal crisis in Ukraine, all of those things have come together, and they have driven Ukraine to take this massive gamble of moving its troops to the ceasefire line and considering, apparently seriously considering, an armed attack to try and subdue the Donbass. Already it has become clear, in my opinion, that that has proved a massive miscalculation. They underestimated the extent to which Russia would respond. We've seen a countervailing Russian buildup on Ukraine's eastern border, and we've been having an ever longer series of ever harsher statements from senior Russian officials about how Russia will not stand back and allow a humanitarian disaster in the Donbass, which is in effect a way of Russia saying that if there is a Ukrainian attack on the Donbass, Russia will intervene. We've had comments about this from Kozak, who is the deputy head of Putin's secretariat, the presidential executive office. We've had officials like Patrushev, whom I mentioned before, saying it too. We've had repeated statements from Peskov, Putin's spokesman, and I think by now there can be no doubt about it whatsoever. If Ukraine does launch an offensive in eastern Ukraine, Russia will respond, Ukraine's army will be defeated, and we will have an even bigger crisis on our hands.
Okay, so going by that logic, two things, and I want to focus on Nord Stream 2 because I think the statement by the Ukraine official is big. They're basically acknowledging that the minute Nord Stream 2 is built, there's no need for a pipeline passing through Ukraine, and Ukraine's going to lose a boatload of money. And I think that means that the Ukraine oligarchs are going to lose a ton of money, but also the US and people in and around Biden, as well as the EU oligarchs, people in and around Brussels, all these people that have probably been making a killing off of whatever money passes through that pipeline in Ukraine, they're all going to be left with nothing. And so I think there's something there. So my question is this: was the plan to make Russia look bad, to make Russia look belligerent, so they put some pressure towards the east, paint Russia in a bad light, stir up the Navalny stuff? In other words, Navalny, get back to Russia. You're going to be arrested, and all of this is going to play out. And we're going to once again paint Russia in a bad light, so we can go to Merkel and we can go to Macron and we can go to the EU and say Nord Stream 2 has to go because look at what Russia's doing. They're building up their forces in the east. Poor Navalny. You guys need to stop Nord Stream 2. Is that the first? Was that the first plan? And is the second plan? The only other logical plan is, outside of pulling back, is to actually launch an offensive, in which case Russia said they're going to respond. in which case the neocons and the deep state and the globalists and the Soros and all these guys go to Merkel, they go to Macron, they go to the EU, and they say, you need to cancel Nord Stream 2. Russia has just attacked Ukraine. 2 plans. What do you think?
I think plan A was to deploy all these forces to eastern Ukraine and use the threat of a Ukrainian offensive to get the Europeans to shift their position on the crisis in Ukraine, to come and support Ukraine more visibly on the question of the Donbass, and to accept Ukraine's constant claims that it's not prepared to implement the Minsk agreement, it's not prepared to negotiate directly with the leaders of the 2 Donbass republics, and to get the Germans and the French to agree to that as a way of avoiding a war in the East, and to get them to accept a Ukrainian position that these 2 provinces are rebel provinces could occupied by Russia and should be brought back under Ukrainian control. I think that was plan A, and it's already failed because the Germans and the French have been making endless statements about the fact that they support still the Minsk agreement and direct negotiations by implication between Kiev and the leaders of the 2 Donbass republics. Plan B was, I think, to launch an attack on eastern Ukraine. I mean, if they weren't able to extract concessions, they may have thought that if they launch an attack on eastern Ukraine, Russia would be intimidated by the fact that the Biden administration would come out and would support it, and that would reincorporate eastern Ukraine into Ukraine. It would strengthen Zelensky's and the political system in Ukraine. It would strengthen their position. And from a neocon point of view, it would also have the effect of damaging, perhaps irreparably, Putin's authority within Russia itself, and might set the scene for some kind of color revolution in Russia, which, always remember, is the big prize. And I think that hasn't happened. And I think the next one is clearly to try and find some means of stopping Nord Stream 2 and of putting the Russians in a bad light. But I think at the end of the day, probably not going all the way towards starting a war. The Ukrainians have just issued a statement, by the way, in which the secretary of their Security Council, who is probably a more powerful person than Zelensky himself, has said that Ukraine is not interested in starting a war. And I think we will start to see this thing dialed down. But I think there were various different plans with Ukraine and with the neocons. I'm not sure that it's ever fully thought through. I don't know whether they ever really react very, they really plan ahead very methodically, because they don't consult people in an open way. They don't talk to people like Merkel, Macron, the British, the Americans, whomever, and say, look, if we now launch an offensive in eastern Ukraine, will you support us? I think they thought if they moved all their troops to the ceasefire line, that would create its own momentum and would solve their problems. What it has done instead is that it's landed them in a crisis where their lack of political support has been exposed, and at the same time, they're now at serious risk of humiliation if they pull back. So it's a complex mixture of ideas and thoughts. But if you know how chaotic the decision-making in Kiev is any point in time, you will not be surprised at that. That's very much the way in which decisions are made in Kiev. So yes, I think some of these things played a role. By the way, it's interesting you mentioned Navalny, because a Ukrainian official has actually said that the purpose of the Russian buildup is to divert attention away from the Navalny affair, which, of course, the Russians have completely ridiculed. They said that's one of the, they said that's absolute nonsense. So some Ukrainians do obviously have Navalny on the brain. But I think that the context of this is the deterioration in US-Russian relations that has happened since the Biden administration took office. The Navalny affair is a part of that. This crisis in Ukraine is another. I'm not sure that there is any plan exactly being formed either in Kiev or in Washington. Always the risk is that in the absence of a plan and in the absence of anybody in charge, it's the hardliners, the extremists, the people who are reckless and who think that if they gamble, the gamble will pay off. It's they who will they who take charge and take control. That includes the neocons in Washington, where there is no strong leadership, and it obviously includes the very dangerous hardliners in Kiev, where Zelensky is also a very weak leader.
Right. What about NATO? Is this just another way to? I mean, hell, Biden is already printing trillions upon trillions of dollars. Why not, justify another couple of trillion? And I'm exaggerating. A couple of trillion to NATO by creating this whole, conflict, this whole tension in the area, so NATO can come along and say, you see, we are useful. Sleepy Joe, can you send us maybe 2-3 trillion while you're printing all that money?
Well, it's interesting you've just said that, because I'm just looking at a headline on Zero Hedge, which reads, Biden to boost already bloated Pentagon budget with proposed $715 billion. So, I mean, we've already spent
just
10 trillion.
Print that money. Print that money.
Exactly. Another, 10 trillion here, 4 trillion there, another 700 billion to the Pentagon. Obviously, exactly what you said. Now, clearly, there is always this push to keep military budgets ever growing, spend as much money as you possibly can. That pressure is always there. It's a constant, and it's always a factor in US policy making. It's something that you can never exclude. And that, of course, includes NATO also, because when we talk about NATO, it's important to say that NATO is, to a very great extent, a massive way of funding the military-industrial complex in the US, because the US sells arms to all its NATO allies. That way they pay the big companies in the US, and these companies, the military-industrial complex in the US, makes lots of money out of this. So, I mean, that is always a factor. And creating tensions, a crisis with Russia, always plays into that. So that's a big factor in itself. But I'm going to say something else about NATO, which is that I think NATO at the moment is in no condition to take on Russia, especially in Ukraine. Now, I was reading some extraordinarily interesting articles by two very intelligent people who know a lot more about military affairs than I do. One is Scott Ritter, who I think was a former Marine officer and who was a former weapons inspector. And he discussed in that article how reduced NATO, its actual conventional forces in Europe have actually become. I mean, essentially, there's 4 battalions in Northern Europe, which are supposed to hold the entire Russian army at bay in the event that there was an attack on Northern Europe. And there's this brigade that we were talking about in Italy, and there's another brigade where various countries supposedly contribute forces to, and which, by the way, at the moment is led by Turkey. But it really is in no condition to fight a war against Russia in Ukraine. It couldn't do that. And Anatol Lieven, who is a civilian, but who has much more contact with people who are involved in military policy than I do, he made exactly the same point. He said that if you are really going to take on Russia in a place like eastern Ukraine, you have to reverse all the strategies that has been followed over the last 30 years. You've got to build up massive armored forces. You've got to reintroduce conscription in some European states. You've got to tell European populations that they've got to brace themselves for the possibility again of nuclear war. And you've also got to reduce your military posture in the Pacific, where you are facing off against China. And Anatol Lieven correctly says there's absolutely no way that NATO is going to do that. And I think lots of NATO officials understand this. I certainly think the Germans and the French do. I think even the British do. And the British, by the way, are in the process of reducing the size of their army. They're actually going to give up, dispose of something like a quarter of their tank troops and reduce their ground forces even further. I don't think they really want an extended commitment in Ukraine, of all places, that they simply don't have the means at the moment to actually fulfill in a meaningful way. So on the one hand, NATO talks big. It keeps up this propaganda of crisis and war with Russia because that gives it its reasons for existence. It also works very well for the neocons. It works very well for the military industrial complex in the United States. But when it comes down to it, when it comes to actually going to war in eastern Ukraine and indeed having Ukraine join NATO, that's not what they want to do. So you had this farcical business last week of Zelensky turning up NATO headquarters and talking to Stoltenberg and telephoning people like Justin Trudeau and talking to people like Boris Johnson and saying that NATO needs to fast track Ukraine's membership of NATO, and all of these worthy people basically saying nothing in response and giving him the brush off. So it's talk, it's no real action. But talk has consequences. And if you go on telling Ukrainians, well, we back you absolutely, you're completely in the right, it's the Russians who are the bad guys, it's always the danger that some people in Ukraine will take you seriously and might launch an offensive in eastern Ukraine on that basis.
Yeah, that's what I get worried about. What if I doubt it will ever happen, but what if Ukraine was to enter NATO?
Oh, well, I mean, I think in that point, I think the very first thing that would happen is that Russia would recognize the two breakaway republics of the Donbass, the Donetsk and Lugansk People's Republics. And I think you see a major Russian buildup. And I think you'd also see the Russians starting to take ever further steps to destabilize Ukraine itself. And bear in mind, they can do that. They haven't started. They haven't started on what they could do in Ukraine. There would be enormous pressure and confrontation in Ukraine. I don't think it's going to happen because I think the Germans, especially, who remember, fought a war in Ukraine. They fought two wars in Ukraine in 1914-18 and 1941-45, and it ended disastrously for them on both occasions. I don't think the Germans will ever agree to it. They blocked it when it was suggested in 2008, and I'm sure they would block it again.
Yeah, I'm positive. I just wanted to get your response. What if? What would Russia do? Like, what would be the first things that Russia would do? It's just interesting to hear if that was to be game planned out. But there's actually a question that Valley S has sent via Super Chat, which I want you to address. And there's another question via Flying Boar, which leads me into the next topic, which is the Biden family in Ukraine, because we can't separate the Bidens from Ukraine. It's all connected. But let's do 2-3 real quick super chats. A super sticker from We Karen. Thank you very much. From Jim Marshall, $4.99 super chat. Thank you very much. And from Valley S. I'm confused, guys. Set me straight, please. Why are people wanting to fight Russia?
Oh, you're absolutely right. Why do they want to? Why go to war with Russia? I mean, there is a famous comment of Bismarck's that going to war with Russia is like trying to avoid suicide by choosing death. I mean, it's a mad idea. I mean, it's completely ludicrous. The Russians are not a threat to any European state. They're not a threat to the United States. They are completely focused on their own domestic development. They are not looking for war. There is no logical reason why we should seek war with them. The reason we are in this crisis with Russia is because in the United States and Britain plays a big role in all of this. There are all these people all the time who have these very, very complicated geostrategic strategies, geopolitical strategies. They are still obsessed with these ideas that Brzezinski came up with way back in the 90s, whereby, you break up Russia into, or weaken it, establish some kind of hegemonic position over it. That way you gain control of its vast territory, its huge natural resources. You encircle and weaken China that way, and you establish the West forever as the dominant, hegemonic, super duper power that will lead us into the great globalist future. There are people who actually think like that. There really are. That's what's so strange and disturbing about this. And of course, they don't talk always in that way. They sometimes talk in, about democracy and freedom, and it's all about extending democracy and doing all of these things, creating all this chaos and all this misery is all about ultimately extending democracy so that we can establish this great globalist future. But that's what it's all about to some extent. And it's also an idea, an obsession with some policy elites have in Washington, going all the way back to a document, a Pentagon paper produced in 1992 by none other than Paul Wolfowitz, who was one of the architects of the Iraq War, by the way. But Paul Wolfowitz said that the United States must never allow a great power to emerge in Western Eurasia. That is to say, a power that will take the place of the former Soviet Union, which could challenge the United States, and that should be an objective of US power. And again, that ties in with this greater geostrategic objective of breaking up Russia and circling China and all that. So the result is that America, the United States, the American people, the European people are hostages of this, frankly, demented, neocon, globalist strategy, which isn't really even a strategy, and which can never succeed. And what it has done instead is that it's alienated and antagonized Russia, forced it into an ever closer alliance with China, and at the same time is led to the situation which we are now seeing. We're talking about a possible war in eastern Ukraine, which might conceivably involve NATO, and in which NATO would be rapidly defeated and humiliated if it ever took place. So it just goes to show you how demented and foolish all this is.
Okay, so let's dovetail into Biden and the Biden family. And let's start with Flying Boar's super chat question. Joe Biden is quiet right now of all leaders on Ukraine. I guess he has been advised by Obama to stay out of it because of Hunter Biden and Burisma. And so on the back of that super chat question, Alexander from Flying Boar, we had the Daily Mail come out with tons of Hunter Biden pictures. I mean, just absolutely stunning. I mean, I'm speechless after I saw those photos. The Daily Mail also did a forensic analysis on those photos and on those documents from that MacBook. And they came to the conclusion that they're 99.999% certain, the professionals that took a look at everything, that all those documents, all those videos, all those photos were indeed Hunter Biden's. In other words, nothing was forged, nothing at all. So we now have 100%, pretty much 100% confirmation that all that material on that MacBook did belong to Hunter Biden, all the messages, everything. Why do I bring that up? Because all of a sudden, these photos are leaked. Essentially, they're leaked. You have everything that's going on in Ukraine. We know what Hunter Biden and Joe Biden and Devin Archer and John Kerry were up to in Ukraine in 2013, 2014. And I'm not going to And I also want to say the European Union, Christine Lagarde, all these people at the IMF, we know that there was a lot of money laundering. A lot of money was entering Ukraine, and it was being funneled out of Ukraine. Nord Stream 2 is going to go online. A lot of the money that used to pass Ukraine via the gas pipelines from Russia is going to dry up. What's going on here with all of this stuff with Biden, with Ukraine, with the money that is going to dry up in Ukraine because of Nord Stream 2, with Biden's deteriorating physical condition? Are we looking at all of this being concocted to somehow, some way move Biden out of president and move Kamala in as president? How do you see all of this? Are there dots to connect, or are there no dots in all the stuff that's going on?
No, I absolutely think there are dots and that they do connect. But before I say that, can I just make a quick point in addition to the points that I made earlier about Ukraine and its situation? And I'm glad you brought up the IMF and Christine Lagarde, because I forgot to mention that Ukraine is currently again negotiating for further funding from the IMF. Ukraine has been negotiating for funding from the IMF ever since the events on Maidan in 2014. It survives basically on IMF funding. And we are now apparently looking at a possibility that that might dry up. So that's another fact which is pushing, I suspect, Ukraine towards this crisis in eastern Ukraine that we are seeing. But let's turn to this question of the Daily Mail article and the Hunter Biden story. Now, the first thing viewers outside Britain need to know is that the Daily Mail website is the most read current affairs website in Britain. It far surpasses amongst British readers The Guardian, for example. I mean, it's very widely read here. And this article, this piece on the contents of Hunter Biden's laptop, which you can, as you absolutely rightly say, the Daily Mail unequivocally confirms to be Hunter Biden's laptop. The information that's contained in this report by the Daily Mail is huge, and it is really, it leaves nothing to the imagination. I mean, some of it is incredibly lurid. I mean, there are photographs there which, to be frank, I am surprised the Daily Mail would publish, not just because they involve Hunter Biden, but because of the very nature of the acts that are being shown in them, which I would not expect to see in the Daily Mail in any shape or form.
I don't even think you could describe them, Alexander, to be honest. I don't think you could describe some of the photos there, because this live stream will probably get cut off. I mean,
absolutely. Well, I mean, I'm not going to describe them. I wouldn't even describe them if that very real risk did not exist. I mean, they are unbelievable. And as I said, I mean, I am just staggered that the Daily Mail is showing them. And given that it is showing them and is telling us that what it's showing are just a very few samples of pictures that are apparently present, pictures and films that are apparently present in huge quantities. Well, you know, I have to ask why. Why is this information being provided to the British public at this time on this scale? I mean, it's just something that I found really remarkable. And I do wonder, I really do wonder whether this isn't partly readying the British public for the possibility that Joe Biden's position in the United States, as a result of all of this, is going to become untenable in the United States very shortly, and to prepare the British public for the possibility that there's going to be a transition in the United States to Kamala Harris very soon. Now, I may be reading more into this than is the case, but as I said, I just cannot understand why the Daily Mail is covering the story in this way. And bear in mind, the Daily Mail is very close to the British government. It's conservative, and it's very close to the British Conservative government. And I just wonder whether it hasn't been given the green light now to publish all this material.
By the
Maybe
MI6,
not.
you mean? By
Well, by whomever,
the British
and
deep state?
maybe and also by people in Washington itself, because remember, all of these people are interconnected with each other. They talk to each other, and it may be felt that it's a safe way to do that, to get this material out in public in Britain, in an English language newspaper, which can be read in the United States, which a lot of people in the United States do read, and that way prepare the way for the fact that all this information is going to start coming out in the United States also. I wonder whether before very long, and just to summarize all of this, we won't be hearing an announcement that there's been serious problems with Hunter, and that this has led to Joe Biden deciding that he can't remain president because of his concerns about his son. Now, there is something in this story by the Daily Mail which I really did make my eyebrows rise, and which did make me wonder whether this is partly the agenda, because there's the Daily Mail, in all the vast selection of emails and messages between Hunter and Joe that it could have published, it focused on some in which Hunter complains to Joe that a previous announcement in a previous election cycle, which Joe made, in which he said that he couldn't stand for president because of problems within his family, somehow meant, as Hunter saw it, that it was his problems that were preventing Joe from standing. And Hunter felt very aggrieved about this and felt that Joe making those kind of points, in effect, set him up as a kind of target and the person who was to blame for the fact that his father wasn't standing for the presidency. Now, the Daily Mail chose to focus on those particular emails, and I wonder whether there isn't a hint there.
In what way? I mean, is this
Well,
is this a way for the Daily Mail, which is also huge in the United States? We have to point out. I mean, it's a massive publication. Is this a way for them to prepare the foundation for statements coming out of the U.S. intelligence agencies, the UK intelligence agencies, to once again blame, say Russia for the leaking of these laptop documents and these photos and these videos, and then also once again start throwing it out there that, look, Russia leaked all this stuff out there. They're being belligerent in Ukraine. They've got this Nord Stream 2 thing where they're trying to control the energy supply in Europe. Look at what they're doing to Navalny. Right. And all of this will lead to Joe Biden having to step down in some sort of dignified manner, perhaps.
Exactly.
In a dignified manner, and then to usher in Kamala Harris, who will come as the tough president, the strong president, to say, I will not stand for any more of this Russian belligerence. And look what they did to Joe and his family and all of this stuff. I mean, do you see where I'm going with this? Is this what this may be about?
That is exactly what I'm thinking. I think you've got it precisely. It seems to me that you can argue that you can arrange a situation where Joe Biden retires from the presidency, not because of the many problems that he has, which we've talked about and which we've talked about with Dr. Bill on previous programs, the fact that he's finding it difficult to put his sentences together, the fact that he's incoherent, the fact that he's visibly not in full control. You don't have to admit to any of that. You can simply say the reason he's retiring is because of this enormous problems that he has with his son. And the fact is that we know about these problems because it is the Russians who are putting it out there. And that, it seems to me, may be the situation that is now being created. So you manage to find a way of leveraging Biden out of the White House in a way that doesn't tell the American people, well, you were led up the garden path, you thought you were electing a president, but in fact you were electing somebody who isn't capable of being president, and we didn't tell you that. So you avoid that embarrassment, and at the same time you throw it onto the Russians, and you make Hunter Biden the object of it at the same time. So it's a elegant way, if you like, of managing what might otherwise be a rather complicated transition. And then Kamala comes in, exactly as you said, and she says, you know, I'm not going to take any more of this. We're going to do all kinds of strong steps with the Russians, and we're going to find a way forward. Now, that's a complicated idea. I accept it's totally speculative, but I do ask myself, why is the Daily Mail publishing all this material at that time? Why is it showing us the things that it is showing us, which, as I said, I think should not be appearing on a newspaper anyway? I mean, there are publications where you can find photographs like that, but not, I would have thought, in a newspaper like the Daily Mail. And at the same time, why is the Daily Mail focusing on particular emails in which it is saying that the reason Joe Biden could not become president in an earlier election cycle was because of problems with Hunter?
Yeah. It doesn't, it all seems to, it doesn't make sense, but then it all seems to make sense. But of course, we're just speculating here. All this stuff happening at once is not a coincidence.
No. Well, I don't think so. I don't think it's a coincidence. I've never believed that. I don't believe it's any kind of coincidence, actually.
Yeah. All right. So let's, I put the link for the call-in, guys. I'll put that in again so everyone can see that. Let's get to some calls. Let's do some super chats, though, beforehand, as we wait for people to jump in. As we do the calls, guys, let's last week we did about a 5-hour live stream. Yeah. Let's try to keep this one to say we'll go like another hour. So let's just try to keep the calls. Let's get the questions in there, short, concise, and we'll answer them as well as in a concise manner, so we can not go for another 5 hours like we did last week.
Well, indeed, which of course means that some people have to wait longer, and that's, you know, a bit hard on them. So let's try and keep it a little bit more concise this time.
Yeah, let's do some super chats, Alexander, as people come in, and I'll put that link in the live stream in one more minute. I'll put that link in again. From Magnesia Shan says, the Russian roulette indeed. Guys, please learn to play a bit of poker first. Love, M. Thank you very much.
Absolutely.
Super chat.
By the way, it's a very, very good, interesting point, because, of course, one of the things you often hear people say is that the US plays poker and the Russians play chess, and the two don't really understand each other very well because they're playing different games when they conduct their foreign policy. I've never really actually believed that. It seems to me that the truth is almost exactly the opposite. I think the Russians in their foreign policy play poker very well. It's the US that plays chess. I talked about all these complicated geopolitical strategies that Brzezinski and the neocons gifted us, except, of course, they play chess badly. And that's the contrast.
Yeah. All right. From, let's see, let's do a couple more super chats. From the English loyalist, Trump was ever right to take away funds from NATO, forcing Europeans to build up their own defense. Maybe it was for their own good. The US is weakening and can't protect Europe as it once was.
Well, absolutely. And I think actually that at least what Trump was trying to do actually made complete sense. And it was partially effective, because what the Europeans do is that they, on the one hand, want to keep the US in Europe, because, of course, that means that they don't have to spend a great deal of time and effort building up their defense themselves and doing all that sort of thing, which is expensive and might make demands on European populations, which the European populations don't want to meet. And at the same time, that makes them even more reluctant to spend money on defense, if you think about it, because by not spending money on defense, they can come along to the Americans and say, well, we need you to protect us because we can't do it ourselves. It's a very clever and rather cynical racket. And the Germans, by the way, play it especially supremely well. They say, you know, we don't need an army because the Americans will do it for us. And then they come along to the Americans and say, well, you've got to protect us because we don't have an army. I mean, now what Trump said is, you know, I'm not playing this racket anymore. You've got to sort yourselves out. If you really think there's a threat from Russia, you've got to pay more to defend yourselves from it. And why should the US spend all that money to protect you? And the Europeans didn't like it at all. And the Germans were particularly upset about it. And now here comes generous Uncle Joe. And he says, well, you know, we're going to make up with all our allies and we're going to base everything on our allies. We're back to the old racket again.
All right. Well said, Alexander. Let's keep things moving real quick, Alexander, from the Discord server. Will the Turkish lira collapse? Very quickly. What do you think? We're talking about NATO?
Not impossible. NATO is indeed a NATO member, though, again, apparently on the brink of being sanctioned or perhaps already sanctioned. And now they're talking about buying fighter jets from Russia. It's all very complicated. But I think the Turkish lira could quite easily collapse. I think Turkey could quite easily tip into hyperinflation. The only thing that's preventing that from happening is that Erdogan has this extraordinary skill at the last moment to pull a financial rabbit out of the hat, getting either Qatar or possibly China or someone else to cover him whilst he runs into more problems. And I wonder for how long this game will continue. So far, he's used great skill to leverage what he's doing, but at some point, I think people will become tired of him. But yes, a collapse of the lira, which to be clear means the collapse of the Turkish banking system and hyperinflation. I'm afraid it's a very real possibility. It's happened in Turkey before, by the way. It wouldn't be the first time.
All right, let's do one more super chat here from Mark Hewitt, and we'll get to calls. Biden says that Kamala will head the border crisis. Kamala stays as far away from it as possible. Did Kamala realize she was being made a sacrificial lamb?
Well, indeed. I mean, you could look at it in one of two ways. That on the one hand, you could say that Biden giving her this important post is a way of showing that, you know, she's the successor to be. She's been given the most important job in the administration. That was what Obama did with Biden. He appointed Biden the person to take charge of the border. On the other hand, if you are a Machiavellian person, I think Biden has that side to him too, by the way. You could give Kamala a job which she will spectacularly fail in, and as a result say to all the other people in the Democratic Party, well, maybe it's not such a good idea to sort of leverage me out and bring Kamala in. People don't like her very much, and she's an obvious failure anyway. So why not stick with me? I think it's quite possible. I mean, you know, that's the sort of thing that does happen. I mean, you know.
Oh boy, yeah. Curious Sad, by the way, I'm looking at the chat. Curious Sad is a troll here. I would remove Curious Sad from the live stream, but man, what you're saying, Curious Sad, is just I'm laughing. It's great. Kamala is our new star. Anyway, we'll leave you in there because you're pretty funny. Your comments are pretty funny. Alexander, let's take some calls. And some trolls have a good sense of humor. We'll start with Otno Says. Otno Says we're going to bring you to the stream. And let's once again, guys. We got a lot of people actually waiting on calls, so let's keep everything concise, and we'll knock these out, and we'll have a good conversation.
Yes.
Otno Says, how you doing?
Hello, good evening. Can you hear me?
Good. Yes, we can hear you.
Good to have you here.
Thank you very much. Great work as usual, gentlemen. I'll try to be short and fast, but not furious. Alexander, first of all, congratulate you on the excellent analysis about the Merkel-Xi talk. Great. I recommend everyone to listen to that show.
Yeah.
You know what I mean. I don't find
absolutely.
Also, rest in peace for Prince Philip. I believe he was a very likable character, including his gaffes. They were Okay. So let's get to Ukraine. I don't know about Nord Stream. I think it will be finalized soon, and don't know what force on Earth could stop it. Ukraine might get irrelevant from this point of view, but with all this global warming, which seems very cold, last night was freezing in Bucharest. Maybe in 10 or 20 years, the need for natural gas will double, and Ukraine could get back on track. What I was wondering, US doesn't seem to lose much in any situation if it stirs up trouble in Ukraine. Of course, provided that they don't send troops there. And I don't think they will. NATO and US are not obliged to defend Ukraine. Biden may talk all he wants, but nothing forces US to help them directly, at least. And maybe couldn't be this trap to entice Russia to enter this time with military forces in uniform, because everyone said in Crimea they were present, but officially they weren't, except the Sevastopol forces, which were there legally under Ukraine-Russian agreement. In case Ukraine, in a moment of madness, attack the eastern provinces and starts to defeat them, it isn't impossible. It's hard to believe, but it isn't impossible. And Russia can't help them with volunteers and equipment, and needs to get inside Ukraine with troops. It creates a precedent which smears the image of Russian foreign policy, and US would revel in this, I believe.
Yeah. Yes.
NATO as such, US aside, is totally incapable to help Ukraine, as you pointed out. And another strategic thing, not that the neocons think too far into the future. This is, but maybe others do. What if conflict breaks up, and there are a lot of casualties, and the bad blood between non-Russian Ukrainians and Russia really makes these two countries antagonists. For now, I don't think there is a very strong anti-Russian sentiment in Ukraine, except for a few extremist factions. This would be my implied two questions.
Yeah. You cover wonderfully many points. Let me just deal firstly with Nord Stream 2. I think one thing to always understand about Nord Stream 2 is, yes, it would be difficult for Ukraine as a country, also be very difficult for some people, some of the business people, oligarchs, if you like, in Ukraine, who have regularly used Russian gas. They've imported Russian gas, and then they've re-exported it to the EU, and they've made quite a lot of money out of it. This has been one of the major factors.
A lot of money.
Exactly. This has been one of the major factors. So there is a personal aspect to this. I mean, that would lose some very powerful people in Ukraine, a lot of funding. But let's get to the underlying point that you're making. Firstly, I do sometimes wonder whether, from the US point of view, keeping the status quo in Ukraine isn't the optimal solution, because it means that there's this constant running saw in relations between the EU and Russia, which prevents the EU and Russia from actually coming together and negotiating and talking to each other and sorting things out. And yes, at one level, if there is a war in eastern Ukraine, and if the Russians are forced to intervene in eastern Ukraine, and of course the Russians have, over the last couple of days, been talking about the need to avert a humanitarian crisis in eastern Ukraine, which I see, by the way, as their attempt to prepare the ground for the fact that their army might have to intervene in eastern Ukraine. Yes, at one level, that will trigger a huge crisis, but it would also, in a strange kind of way, resolve the issue. It would mean that Crimea and Donbass and all those places are irretrievably lost to Ukraine. No chance of Ukraine ever getting them back. And then once the whole situation has calmed, after a few years, the EU and Russia might start to talk again, because in a way, the crisis is out of the way. So I would have thought, if you're really Machiavellian and clever from an American point of view, it's the present situation where there's no war and no peace. There's constant tension. There's all these issues about, you must protect and preserve Ukraine and all of that work to US advantage. Ending the crisis in Ukraine by provoking a war might actually, in the long run, be counterproductive, because once facts are created on the ground which cannot be changed, then the whole perspective after a certain point starts to shift.
Yeah, frozen conflict. Thank you very much, No Sense, for that question.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Take care.
You too.
Okay, let's bring in Dr. Bill. Frozen conflict, Alexander. Frozen conflict. Dr. Bill, are you with us, Dr. Bill?
Yes.
Great to hear from you. How are you doing?
I'm doing fine. It's a beautiful day again. And I put a thought when I did my super chat that we have the Washington clown show with Biden becoming more demented all the time. I mean, it's worse than when the first time we talked about it. I don't remember which date that was, but it's getting worse. And then we have the EU clown show. So you take the clown show in Washington and you multiply it by the clown show in the EU, and then you multiply it by the actual clown in Kyiv, and you have clown show cubed.
It's a clown show.
But my thought was, this can't go on like it is. When I went there went to Russia the first time, and was in the first American delegation to visit Crimea after the coup, the group, the whole trip was planned and set up and took off because of how close we were to potential war with Russia. And now it's worse. And Zelensky is in this situation where he's caught between the neocons and the neoliberals in Washington and the Nazis in Kyiv, and he can't do anything. If he does anything, Russia will go all the way to Kyiv and lance this abscess that's in Kyiv to end the whole thing. And the U.S. can't do anything because the Pentagon doesn't want to go to war. And so it'll look awful. And then Zelensky will be able to, since Ukraine is destroyed, he'll be able to just leave and go to Poland and restart his clown show on TV in Poland. And that's potentially possible.
Go
So,
on.
I mean, going off of what Dr. Bill said, Alex, just to ask you a very simple, basic question, and I think I know the answer. Russia doesn't want to go all the way to Kiev, do they? I mean, they have no interest.
Well, what I've seen at the Saker, I mean, they can't, take this forever. And this is the, the whole great game, and the Zbigniew Brzezinski, Eurasia plan, and it can't come off because now you have the Russia, China, Iran condominium geopolitical alliance, and there's nothing they can do, and the empire doesn't know what to do.
Right.
From there.
Right. A few things. First of all, I think Dr. Bill's joke about the clowns in Washington, the clowns in the EU, and the clowns in Kiev is absolutely right. And of course, actually, it's very worrying, because when you are led by a leadership in Washington that is all over the place, a leadership in the EU that argues over seating arrangements in that ludicrous way, and an actual clown in Kiev, that's exactly the situation where terrible miscalculations and appalling mistakes might be made, because you're not being led by serious people who think their options out through. Now, if there's a war, I don't think the Russians at this moment in time want to take over Ukraine. I think that's absolutely something which you're talking to the fight.
I don't think they want to take over Ukraine.
Yeah.
Want to lance the abscess and leave.
Exactly. I mean, this is the point. This is the point, because I mean, if you're talking to people in the finance ministry in Moscow, I mean, they'd be utterly horrified by that idea. They said, we can't possibly at this time afford to reconstruct Ukraine. We're focused at the moment on building up our own economy. But the Russians have said, and this is, Sergei Lavrov has said it, it's now been repeated by other officials, if there is a war, it will destroy Ukraine. Now, what I think they mean by that is, firstly, Ukraine will lose more territory, because the Donbass, in that case, there's no conceivable way that it would be going back. The Minsk agreement would be dead. We would definitely see freedom, a secession on the part of the Donbass republics. And I think ultimately, in a war, I think that the situation would inevitably be the end of the government that exists today in Kiev. Now, I'm not sure quite how it would be done, but I agree. I think the Russians have come to see that government in Kiev as a perpetual threat to themselves and a thorn in their side. I don't know whether they would send all their army there, but bear in mind, if the entire Ukrainian army is obliterated in eastern Ukraine, that could very well trigger a crisis in Kiev, which may very well be what the Russians want. They have all kinds of levers that they can pull, and I suspect that at that point, the whole thing becomes unviable. That is what Lavrov said. He specifically used the term Ukraine would be destroyed. It would destroy Ukraine. We don't know the detail of what he's thinking, of what he means, but I followed Lavrov very closely. I doubt that he's talking out of, saying things that he doesn't know, and that the Russians haven't game planned this by now.
Russians never do that.
Yes, the Russians never do that. Exactly.
All right, great. Dr. Bill, great to see you. Thank you very much for your question.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
All right, looks great where Dr. Bill is. Looks really relaxing.
Absolutely.
Let's bring in, we got a lot of people in the green room. We'll call it the green room, the waiting room.
Green.
But let's bring in Tarif here, and we'll keep this show moving. Let's keep everything moving along. Here's Tarif. How you doing, Tarif?
How y'all doing? Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning on my end. I'm sorry. I'm Central Time. But anyway, thanks for taking all our call. I want to talk about Ukraine, the Donbass region, and also Julian Assange. Okay, I was thinking about something when I brought up the Nord Stream 2 pipe, how it's connected to Ukraine. And also, I'll listen to somebody else was talking about how Ukraine was going to be how Russia, if Ukraine invades Donbass, Russia wasn't going to invade Ukraine. And I was like, wow, that's pretty deep statement, because we got Russians that live in Ukraine, Eastern Ukraine. But I thought about it more, and I said, well, that guy is right, because I started thinking about something. Okay, if Russia attacks Ukraine for attacking Donbass region, then they play in the hands of the Biden administration, right? Well, sanctions going to be levied against Russia, and to avoid that, what Putin and his generals have to do, which they probably already did already, is to give well to give them arms, to give the Donbass region lots of arms, Kornet missiles, solar-fired anti-aircraft missiles, whole bunch of machine guns, anti-aircraft guns, Katyusha rockets, something that you can move them around mobile, right? Think about it. And then embedded into the Donbass region is regular, Russian troops. I won't say Russian troops, but Spetsnaz, ex-military, Spetsnaz people, Russian troops that's in plain clothes, Donbass clothes. They train in the Donbass citizens as well. And I won't be surprised you might have some Venezuelans and also Syrians and Iranians there too, with combat experience in Iraq and Syria, training the Donbass people. So I'm just imagining these people in that region preparing for a war with the Ukrainian army, which is a mechanized army, right? Tanks, aircraft, drones, Turkish drones now. So when they attack, so just say if they attack, picture this. They attack, all the Donbass people have to do is fight them to a standstill. They don't have to win. Think about this. They're in a defensive position already. They don't have to win. They dug in. They just fight Ukraine military to a standstill. The Ukrainian army have to win. They have to seize that land. If they get stopped at any time, it's over for them. And I think they're gonna stop them. What's gonna happen is this: you have a triangle that's formed with the Russian troops on the border, right? Right parallel to Lugansk and the Donetsk region. Right behind that is electronic warfare and aircraft group right there. You got another one is in Crimea. You got another one, I'm assuming, is above that, Lugansk region. So that make a triangle. So what that mean in military terms, with electronic warfare, they can jam that region, and those drones from Turkey and Israel that was given to or sold to Ukrainian army can become useless. And once they won't have air dominance with those drones, then they're gonna have to be focused right on their own men, their own tanks, their own infantry to accomplish that task. Now, we all know about the Donbarites. That's the division that's gonna fight the hardest, right? Now, it is known that it's people in Ukraine military, Ukraine society, don't really hate the Russians that much. So the regular army really fight the Donbass people that hard? We don't know. Maybe so, maybe not. But at the same time, if that war kicks off, I don't think the Ukrainian army is going to receive that land back. I think they're going to get stalled. It's going to be a standstill, and once that happens, all hell going to break loose. Then the president of Ukraine cabinet going to collapse. Generals going to turn against him. Generals going to be fired. People going to be upset with him. The U.S. administration is going to be upset because they didn't accomplish the task. Marco, she'd be happy because now, she don't have to worry about nothing anymore. That pipeline will be completed, because what's going to happen? The U.S. is going to say, okay, well, they have Russian troops there. No, they don't have Russian troops. It was the bad civilians that fought the Ukrainian army. They're going to ask for proof. Say, where's the Russian proof? I mean, where's the Russian troops? Well, you was losing electronic jamming equipment. Well, can you prove that that Putin and his military was using electronic jamming equipment? That's going to be hard to prove. So they're going to have it's going to be a defeat, and it's going to turn around in Putin's, in Russia's favor, in Germany's favor, and that pipeline is not going to be completed. And that's what's going to happen. I think that's what's game plan, because they say there ain't too many troops on the Russian border anyway, of Russian troops. It's the troops that's on. See, I used to be in the military. I was part of.
I was going to ask you that, Tariff, because you talk as if you have knowledge of military affairs. I should tell you, I've never been in the military. I know a couple of military officers, and I used to be a civilian advisor on legal matters to British soldiers, but I'm absolutely not a military person. But anyway, carry on.
Oh yes. See, but when he was talking, when RT was showing those 4,000 troops that's by the Lugansk and also the Donetsk region, that was auxiliary troops with S-400 missile system. I don't know how true this is, but I heard somewhere, I should have read it, but that the S-400 is not only an anti-aircraft missile system, it has the ability of hacking the aircraft computer system and downloading the information from the aircraft onto its system. So it can do a number of things besides just have an ability of shooting out planes. Then you have the cabini, then you have these other electronic jamming frequencies that the Russians developed over the years with Romania and other countries when they had the Warsaw Bloc. That's going to be used in that region. So basically, it's just going to be the Ukrainian tanks, artillery, and also infantry. They're going to have no air cover. That's going to be over for them. So you're going to see Putin going to come on the other side smelling like a bunch of roses. Nord Stream 2 might get completed. The U.S. going to ask for sanctions against Russia. Germany and France going to say, where's the proof that Russia invaded? No proof, so let's complete the pipeline. Checkmate on that. So right now, all you see, What'd you say, Alex?
No, everything you're saying, Tarif, it's almost like another. It's 2014 #2. It's just a sequel. Everything that happened, like you're saying, Tarif, keeping a defensive position, standing your ground. That's what they did to win the war. Essentially, win the war back in 2014. That's all they have to do again. Then you're right.
Exactly.
That's all they have to do again. Implement the same strategy.
Absolutely. And can I just?
Yes, sir. I'm listening.
Yeah. And can I just say, I mean, a lot of the points that you made, I mean, it is quite open that there are now Russian officers commanding people in the Donbass. It's also quite open that the Russians have supplied military equipment to people in the Donbass. And they did use electronic warfare systems, apparently of eye-watering capabilities. Even NATO was astonished by them in 2014. And they did also, by the way, provide a degree of air defense for Donbass during the 2014 war. They supplied the people in the Donbass with handheld surface-to-air missiles, and they also provided a cross-border artillery support on occasions. And of course, lots of reconnaissance, intelligence, communications, information, that sort of thing. That will all be there. But I think that if there were a real risk of a Ukrainian breakthrough, which is possible, I mean, I'm not saying it's what would happen, but if there were, I think those thousands of Russian troops now on the eastern border would intervene. And can I just say, this figure of 4,000 troops that I've seen quoted in many places. I don't know where it's come from, because the Russian media itself has said that we're talking about 50 maneuvering battalions and 15,000 personnel in total. So it's a lot more men than you're reading about in the Western media. I don't know where this figure of 4,000 has come from. And I think they would intervene if there was a real chance of a Ukrainian breakthrough. I don't think it would be done immediately, but if it looked as if that was a realistic prospect, I suspect it would happen. If I not suspect it, I mean, they've all but said it would happen. And of course, the other situation to look at is, as well as what happened in 2014, look at what happened in Georgia in 2008, when there was a Georgian attack on South Ossetia. The South Ossetians, it became very clear, weren't going to be able to repel it themselves. And the Russians did intervene in that case and drove the Georgian army out of South Ossetia. Now, they had a legal justification to do it in 2008 because their own peacekeepers were attacked. They would have a legal justification to do it this time because Ukraine, if it attacks eastern Ukraine, if it attacks the Donbass, would be breaking international law because it would be violating the Minsk agreement, which people always forget has been confirmed by a resolution of the UN Security Council. And Russia, as a guarantor of that agreement, would have a legal justification this time to intervene, which it didn't have back in 2014. So there's a difference. So I think they would intervene this time. And I mean, they've all but said they would, and we have to assume it. The one point where I don't agree with you, Tarif, is this. I think even if the Russians don't intervene at all, and even if the Ukrainian military in Donbass were to be comprehensively defeated by the people of the Donbass themselves, I can tell you, as night follows day, that the entire media in the West and all Western governments, first and foremost, that of the United States, would still go on insisting that it was the Russians that did it. So I don't think the Russians would gain anything, actually, by staying out of the battle, because regardless of what happens, whether they intervene or whether they don't, if Ukraine is defeated in the Donbass, they will be blamed for it. I think the Russians understand that perfectly well. And I think on this occasion, they're prepared to take that step more openly than they did in 2014 and intervene if they must.
Thank you. Thank you, Tarif.
I just
Thank you.
one more thing about
Yeah.
I just want to say one more thing about Julian Assange. Okay, over the we know 2 weeks ago the Pope sent him a letter, right? Palm Sunday. 3 days ago, the Pope came out and said something about that you have people that need jobs on this planet is being treated as second and third class citizens, and you need social justice for these people. And then you have another group of people that helps out these people by identifying crimes against humanity. And if you ever saw the speech that the Pope gave 3 days ago after Easter Sunday, it's under 2 minutes long. If you've been following the plight of Julian Assange and his wife Stella, that's been tweeting out things, you can see that I think it's the Pope was referring to Julian Assange in that speech and other whistleblowers and journalists. So, which gives hope, and it's the truth. I said it on Force Line Radio, and also the backstory with Lee Stranahan and John Kuryaku. And also, if the Pope comes out in the next week or two and actually says Julian Assange's name, that he's praying for him. That's all you got to say, that he's praying for Julian Assange. You know what I'm saying? Nothing else. That would be good for Julian Assange. I think politically it will. And that would put him more on the map with Catholics and other people around the world. So that's my question. And free Julian Assange, of course.
Free Julian
Well,
Assange.
indeed, free, absolutely. Can I
Yeah,
just say
Alexander.
there's just been some news on this, which is it's a minor thing, but Julian Assange's legal team have just filed their objection to the U.S. government's appeal against the Judge Baritz's decision to refuse extradition to the US. So we are now set up for the court battle, which will probably happen at the end of this month, or possibly at the start of May. So we'll see where we are. Whether the Pope's message to Assange will make any difference in the legal process, I don't know. It's been barely reported here in Britain, like everything else connected to the Assange case. So I don't think, unfortunately, many British people know about it.
Thank you, Tarif.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a
God
great
bless
day.
y'all.
Take care.
All right.
Let's not talk about Assange, but let's talk about Navalny.
Uh,
What did Dr. Bill
Absolutely.
say? Cloud world? Yeah, it's a cloud
Yeah,
world.
absolutely. It is a clown world. Absolutely. Completely so.
Someone said in the live stream, I think it was Mr. Dog, if I got the handle correct, said it's a circus. So many clowns.
It's
We've got a
circus.
Well said. I believe it was you, Mr. I believe the handle is Dog, but that was very, very smart. Let's bring in Amir. Amir, how you doing?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yes,
How are you?
we
Okay,
can.
that's good. So I have two questions. So on the 23rd of March this year, there was a podcast in which Max Blumenthal was present, and he said that Adrian Zenz is a Zionist. I think. Do you know who Adrian Zenz is personally?
Adrian Sense.
Mm.
No, you don't. He's the one behind all the Xinjiang genocide reports.
Ah,
Okay.
okay. Yes,
Yes, so
okay.
I haven't heard him say he's a Zionist before, except in this recent podcast. So I was hoping you could look into that. If
Well, we
anyone's
could-
wondering,
Yeah.
if
Yeah.
anyone's wondering, it's the Soapbox YouTube channel hosted by Anisa Nawi, the former RT
Right.
reporter, and I can't say the podcast name because Islam prohibits
Yeah.
that kind of words.
Is it still associated with RT or is it its
Oh
own?
no,
channel?
I'm not sure actually. I think she has her own project.
I think she does too, actually.
Yeah, we need to research that out though, because I know that she kind of had her own project, but it was through a German company that was associated though with RT. We have to look at that carefully though,
Yes.
just to make
Okay.
sure.
And
yes.
another one is a lot of people say that there have been no independent journalists to Xinjiang, but Pepe has been to Xinjiang before. So I was wondering maybe if you guys have any doubts on Xinjiang, maybe you could ask him because I think he knows a lot more. about
Did you
Xinjiang.
mean Escobar?
Yeah, Pepe Escobar.
Okay. Okay.
Been all over the news lately, especially with
Yes,
his papers
yes.
about last week.
Yes.
Thank you, Amir. That's a big topic, Alexander.
It's
we don't have much information.
No, we
to be
don't.
honest.
No, we don't. And what we get is very conflicted, and people give different accounts, and there's great difficulties getting a clear picture of what is going on there. I understand, by the way, that a lot of Xinjiang actually is open to visitors. That's what I've heard from Chinese sources. It seems, and read on Chinese sources. Westerners say it's something completely different. So obviously, anybody who really does know what's going on there, it would be really useful to know. I have no idea what the political affiliations of some of these people who are talking about Xinjiang is. All I would say that if a supporter of the people in Xinjiang is pro-Israeli, then that would surprise me, given that presumably these people are Muslims, which would make it a little strange. But there we are. It's something that I would obviously need to know more about. I don't pretend to know very much about what's going on in Xinjiang at all. The internal affairs of China, at least in this part of the world, are not something that I know a vast amount about. And undoubtedly, we're going to have to learn, because I'm going to make a prediction over the next few years. It's going to become an ever bigger topic.
Yeah, it is. That's the best part. Okay. Thank you
Thank
for
you,
listening.
Amir. Great question. Thank you very much. All right, let's bring in, we got Zariel, and then Christian, Zahir, and James. Let's bring in Zariel. Zariel, you're up. How you doing?
Hello.
Yes,
Hello,
Zariel,
yes.
how are you?
We can hear you. Hello, Zariel.
Happy Friday, gentlemen.
Happy Friday.
Quick, a few bullet points that I really like to get through. First of all, may the Lord have mercy on his soul, on Prince Philip's soul, because I was reading through some books the other day, and I don't remember which one, but it was an opening comment that he had written. It was a foreword where he was writing about if he was reincarnated. I don't know if you guys are familiar with it. I did try to pull something up in Google, and it was the quote said, "In the event that I'm reincarnated, I would like to return as a deadly virus to contribute to something to solving overpopulation." I found actually quite, and it was not only in the book that he forwarded, but also in a German interview. I found it quite astonishing that the Duke of Edinburgh would actually say something or have something written like that. But you please feel free to search in Google for it. Very, very interesting quote. Second,
very interesting.
the diversion policy, the tactics that are happening right now, I think it is a diversion from something. I don't know what, whether it be Hunter Biden, the von der Leyen mess up in Turkey, or the coup in Turkey, the alleged coup in Jordania, Nord Stream 2. So much is happening right now. But what I've spoken to you gentlemen about quite a few times is the buildup of the NATO forces in Eastern Europe. I asked you about the Defender Europe 21 a couple of weeks ago, telling you about how many troops there are and stuff like that. I just heard that they actually have requested passage through the Bosporus in sending so the United States or NATO, sending 2 naval ships through the Bosporus towards the Black Sea. This is very recent information that I just got from RT. So they are, NATO is literally building up a stronger NATO in the European arena. They say it's an exercise which they have done quite a few times, but they're constantly, I'm hearing from the Western media, they're constantly saying the Russian aggression, and it's always the Russians being aggressive while they are having this Eastern expansion. Now, my first question would be, how in God's name can the United States or or NATO accuse Russia of any aggressions or provocation when they are the ones moving towards the east, and Russia is actually just moving within their borders in a defensive posture? I mean, and why is no one talking about this hypocrisy in any other media?
Let me give a real quick answer, Alexander, for my end. We're trying to talk about it, Zariel, but YouTube shadow bans us, and they don't promote our videos. And the mainstream media, they prop up and they show their videos everywhere, and they're talking, different than us. So that's one quick answer for my end, Alexander.
But Zariel is absolutely right. I mean, the Russians, as they pointed out repeatedly, are redeploying their troops within their own borders, on their own territory, and this is supposedly a threat. The United States sends ships into the Black Sea, which is, of course, in Russia's naval backyard, and that is not a threat. And this sort of strange language goes on all the time. I mean, it's a constant theme that always what the Russians do is aggressive, even when it's obviously defensive, and always what we do is defensive, even when it is extremely provocative, and in most terms and most respects, highly aggressive. But there we are. That is the kind of information space that we all inhabit if we live in the West. That is the reality of this. Just to say very quickly on the point about the 2 warships going to the Black Sea, the NATO is repeatedly been sending ships into the Black Sea. The Russians keep very close watch on them. They have overwhelming striking power if they need to in the Black Sea. So the presence of these naval forces in the Black Sea is actually, I think, more of symbolic significance than anything else. There's been a really interesting study. If you go onto the RT website, it's written by Scott Ritter, and its title is Ukraine's NATO Fantasy is a Suicide Pill in Disguise. Military action by the alliance against pro-Russian forces would be crushed. And Scott Ritter, who has a military background, which, let me repeat again, I don't, goes into a great and very detailed discussion as to the balance of forces in Ukraine and on Russia's western borders. And he points out that any NATO force sent to Ukraine would be comprehensively outmatched by the Russians, and any air force, aviation, aircraft that the United States were to send there, including its most sophisticated fighters, the F-22 and the F-35, would encounter a Russian air defense system, which is both extremely advanced and which has been developed in a way that is specifically intended to counter those fighters and those aircraft, and which has been fine-tuned to do it, and operating against which US pilots barely train. So that's all by Scott Ritter. And I presume that he knows what he's talking about, and it seems convincing to me. So we have all these moves of troops. We've had this big NATO exercise, Europe Defender 2021. We have the ships moved into the Black Sea. It all looks very impressive, but it's all very hollow at the end of the day. But the danger is, if you start taking these steps, there are some people in Kiev who may take it seriously. And they may say, well, if the US is moving ships through the Bosphorus and into the Black Sea, and if the United States is engaging in all these exercises in Europe, and if NATO is making all these statements, then that must mean that they're really going to stand behind us. And that makes it all meaningful, at which point we can take certain risks in eastern Ukraine, which left to ourselves, we might not take. That is what makes the situation so dangerous, and what makes the absence of political leadership, strong political leadership in Washington, Brussels, and Kiev so dangerous also, because it makes it far more likely that miscalculations will take place, and that the more demented, if you like, will take charge in a dangerous situation like this. Quickly, on the subject of Prince Philip and being reincarnated as a virus, it's the kind of crazy thing he did say from time to time. I often think my mother, who met him, thought that he talked in this way from time to time, as a way of expressing his deep frustration at the fact that he wasn't able to make any real decisions in his life, and that his ambitions were constantly thwarted. That's not by any means to excuse those kind of comments. It's simply to explain them.
Okay, thank you very much for that answer. My next question would be, gentlemen, Dr. Michael Yeadon. I don't know if you're familiar with this name.
No,
okay,
not
Dr.
me.
Michael Yeadon is the ex-vice president of Pfizer, an expert on respiratory diseases and vaccines.
Mm.
He has been very recently, popping up in different publishing platforms, which I have been following. In corroboration, or sorry, pardon my English, in connection with Dr. Van den Bosche and Lieutenant Colonel Lawrence Selling, they have all been expressing their
be careful with your word choice.
Yeah.
YouTube is listening.
wording that you don't, that this isn't blocked or flagged, but they have been expressing their professional opinions and on this topic, on this disease topic, if you would. And that's also been, I mean, these gentlemen have been in their fields for well over decades, and nothing is being spoken about them either. It's very that they're being banned, literally digitally blocked. Of course, we know who's doing it, but still, the alternative press is not that small anymore.
It's true, but we are under enormous constraints on what we
just to give an example. Just to give an example on the call-in channel that we tried to spin out, Zariel, to everyone's listening. We had a caller, and they mentioned the name of the Russian shot, and we got knocked down with strikes. I mean, just for the mere mention of the name. So I mean, we have our alt tech platforms, the Odysseys and the Rumbles, but when it comes to big tech at this point, it's just getting worse and worse and worse. I mean, we're getting to the point, Zariel, where we can't even mention the name of the actual companies or the countries that produce these remedies. We can't even say, we have to choose our words. I'm using remedy, I'm using shot. I mean, we're at that point.
I understand. And as I said, is really he was the ex-vice president of this company, so he knows what he's talking about.
They deplatformed the president of the United States.
So correct, exactly.
The logical solution to that is to form a new type of broadcasting service, a different YT, if you please, circumvent this digital blocking.
People are trying, and it's
very hard.
It's hard.
Gab.
Look, they've gone after them hard too. I mean, from what I understand, Gab has been denied bank access to 4 or 5 different banks in the last 3 months. That's how bad it is. I mean, they won't even let them bank, not open up a website, open up a bank account.
Unbelievable. My last question or comment, gentlemen. I don't know if you've also been following this, but churches worldwide have starting to be closed by governments. Canada, for example, the United States. I have noticed UK actually is a very recent victim of this clown world, as it was spoken earlier on. I'm wondering if the EU is next, and it's a question for Alexander: is that constitutionally even legal? I thought the separation between church and states was pretty much the constitutional ground on which the nations were formed.
Indeed so, and I would add, and I'm speaking off the top of my memory rather, but I seem to remember that the European Convention on Human Rights, for example, actually specifically says that there should be protection of the freedom for worship. So closing down churches and preventing people from conducting religious services is a violation of human rights. I'm, reasonably sure that is the case, and it's happening in many places, not just in Europe, obviously, but in many places also, the United States, all sorts of places around the world. Canada indeed. And it may be unconstitutional, but it's also, I'm sure, contrary to human rights law, and yet it is taking place, and there seems to be very little objection to it, because that's the nature of the times in which we live. So I think it's illegal. I think it's contrary to human rights. It's probably contrary to constitutional law in many countries. Your point about separation of church and state is well taken, but it is happening, and it is the reality of the times in which we live.
Yeah. Gentlemen, when are you going into politics?
Me? Well, I made it. Well, in my case, I made a decision long ago that I wouldn't go into politics. I was actually offered the opportunity and I declined it. There were personal reasons for that, which I'm not going to go into, but it just wasn't me.
Alex, what about you?
Oh, the only place I'm looking forward to go is to get back on the road and travel. That's it. I'll get into crypto. That I'm getting into, but not politics. All right. Thank you, Zariel.
Here we go. Can I just say Article 9 of the European Convention on Human Rights contains a provision about everyone has the right to freedom of thought, conscience, and religion. So there it is. It's actually that this right includes freedom to change his religion and also the right to manifest his religion or belief in worship. So there we are, Article 9.1 of the European Convention on Human Rights. It's a while since I saw it, but it is in fact clearly set out as a right within the human right within the European Convention on Human Rights, and it's one which is being violated.
Yes, definitely.
Thank you, Zariel. Great
you.
comments, great question.
Great weekend. Bye, gentlemen.
You too. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Let's bring in Kristen. Kristen, how you doing?
I have never in my life been better. I've turned 49, but I don't feel a day older than 30.
Excellent.
Well, happy birthday. Congratulations.
My birthday, I'm 30 years old, so that's perfect. Never in my life have I had so much energy, so much creativity. And guys, thank you so much for your Ukraine coverage specifically. There is none better. And for geopolitical analysis, I hope to open up the eyes of many because I have seen no better. So both Alexander and Alex, thank you so much. Back to Ukraine. August 2014, that was a very, very dramatic month for me. I was in Belgrade, and my journalist friend called Sergei Belarus, he had taken my video camera and he was doing war reporting in Donbass. But one day in August, I left everything I was doing because the Kiev authorities, they had kidnapped Sergei. So together with Graham Phillips, a British journalist, who you might know, I started a petition. I called the Ukrainian embassy in Oslo. I called the U.S. embassy in Kiev, the International Federation of Journalists, Committee to Protect Journalists, and maybe most important, I had some political contacts in Washington D.C. to put pressure on Kiev to release Sergei. So he was released in the end, but the Kiev authorities, they actually stole my video camera. They left him in a ditch with only his underwear. So that was a very, very dramatic story. And in January 2015, I wrote a big article, Ukrainian Chronicles, on my site sorryserbia.com, which is kind of a reference article. And of course, it's coming all back. And to keep it short, back to my question, because my old friend who used to play guitar in the International Christian Fellowship in Belgrade, my church in Belgrade, that is David Gerenbeck. And he was the political counsel at the embassy in Belgrade. And now, last June, he got a new job. I guess it's a promotion. Because now he is the political counsel at the U.S. Embassy in Kiev. And I remember when I called the embassy, U.S. Embassy there in 2014 about Sergei, they were a bit embarrassed that their quote-unquote democratic partners in Kiev kidnapped journalists. So this was before the U.S. election. that David went to Kiev. Haven't been there since 2006. And then I said to David, I really, really hope that you are going to be a part of a cleanup operation, not a cover-up.
Mm.
We've seen now that Hunter Biden has come out with his book.
Mm.
I mean, unfortunately, we do not have outlets like Daily Mail in Norway. I mean, it was excellent what you said in the live stream now. But they said that now Hunter Biden has repented and everything. So one question is, how much will this new book from Hunter Biden have a play in what is happening?
Mm.
And I'm wondering if you have any specific knowledge of the political game from the U.S. Embassy in Kiev. How much are they playing the dirty games with guys like Victoria Nuland and guys saying F the EU?
Well, Christian, lots of points. Firstly, your story about Sergei is absolutely fascinating, hugely interesting, and you seem to have done wonderful work on his behalf. And I think that is really remarkable, the tale you've told us. One thing I would say about Ukraine and the Ukrainian war is that it highlighted to a vivid degree, for me, the very selective view some people take about which journalists and which journalists' lives matter and which don't. I can remember way back, a bit before, there were some American journalists got killed in Syria, in Hama, when there was shelling took place there, especially a woman. I don't remember her name. And I remember the huge amount of publicity and anger there was about that in the media. Now, there were articles about that person, about people saying how wrong it was to attack and kill journalists in that fashion. How it was suggested that the Syrian government attacked this journalist on purpose. And then when Ukraine does similar things, or similar things happen in Ukraine against journalists who report from the other side, a wall of silence falls. And it also falls, especially, by the way, if those journalists are either Russian or are connected to Russian media agencies. Lots of Russian journalists have been killed in Ukraine. There's been much publicity about the deaths of Russian journalists in Russia itself, but when they get killed on the front line in Ukraine, especially if they're targeted by the Ukrainian military, that doesn't seem to be very interesting or newsworthy so far as the Western media is concerned. I merely add that. I found your story about Sergei an absolutely fascinating one. Turning now to the topic of the US Embassy in Kiev, it is absolutely centrally involved in everything that happens in Ukraine. One of the advantages of Ukraine Gate and that bizarre impeachment of Donald Trump that took place in 2019 and 2020 is that we learned an awful lot about how central the US Embassy is in making decisions in Ukraine. That it's a key power center in Kiev, and that it talks to everyone and has a finger in every pie. And I have no doubt at all that they are directly and very heavily involved in all the decisions which are being made now. I would add that they've issued a whole series of extraordinarily inflammatory, I would say even provocative statements. They supported, for example, publicly the closure of Ukrainian radio stations that they objected to and television stations that they objected to, and to Ukraine's very bizarre decision to sanction one of its own citizens, Viktor Medvedchuk, because he heads a opposition party which is seen by some people as pro-Russian. So the US Embassy is intimately involved. Now, Hunter Biden and his book, I haven't read his book. I have no intention of reading his book. I read a review of it in Washington Examiner, which said that it skates over all the controversial issues. His, work in Ukraine, his work in China, his business deals there, his problems with, his gun license, his history with, well, all sorts of things. Doesn't really talk about that. It mentions his laptop in one place. I don't think this particular book is going to gain a great deal of traction, but the story that appeared in the Daily Mail, I think may. And I'm not entirely clear, I discussed this in a program recently, why Hunter Biden is publishing books and giving interviews at this time when he is supposed to be under investigation. And that is either remarkably reckless or remarkably sanguine, and suggests that he expects that those investigations are not going to be pursued very vigorously. But the publication of this material in the Daily Mail, which is shocking, does make me wonder whether perhaps things are in fact more difficult for him than he realizes. And I suspect the Daily Mail article is going to be more damaging to him than whatever benefit he gets from his book.
Thank you, Alexander. Maybe this is for Alex. What does a political council at the embassy in Kiev do? How much are they driving policies? How much are they taking initiative? How much is the policies controlled from Washington, D.C.?
I think they control everything. Short answer, at least in Ukraine, I think they control everything. I think they run the country. That's my opinion. I mean, Jeffrey Pyatt was a driving force in the coup in Ukraine. He's now, coincidentally, he's the ambassador in Greece as well. And I think he's been the driving force between many of the problems between Greece and Russia at the moment. So I think in Kiev's case, I think the U.S. embassy and any position from the ambassador down to the council positions, I think they ran the show. And I think Biden would come in and he would, give the orders out and they would execute. That's just my take.
Yeah.
Sorry, Alexander, you go.
What I was simply going to say is, I think if the U.S. ambassador turned up at Zelensky's office and told Zelensky, pull the troops back from eastern Ukraine, Zelensky would have to do it. I think
it's an order from the president. I mean, it's coming, the ambassador is pretty much relaying it from DC. So yeah, I agree, Alexander. They would do whatever the embassy told them to do. And just going off that point, in reality, okay, every U.S. embassy around the world is important.
Yeah.
But in reality, a country like Ukraine, an American embassy there wouldn't be as important as, say, an American embassy in London.
Yeah.
I mean, okay, that's, Ukraine, it's an American embassy and it's important, but it shouldn't have had the same amount of importance and weight that, say, a post as the American ambassador in London would have, or the American ambassador in Mexico. I mean, those would be posts where an American ambassador would be extremely important, an embassy would be extremely important. In Kiev, it would be an important embassy just because it's the American embassy, but it wouldn't be an embassy that would run the entire country the way it did, unless it was for other nefarious reasons, which we saw play out.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, it's like the U.S. embassy in Saigon in, say, 1963 or something like that. I mean, it's that important today, certainly in the affairs of the country.
Thank you so much, guys. Alex Lamb is waiting for you in Belgrade. Let me know before so I can plan. And Alexander, of course, I'd love to introduce you to the cuisine of Serbian land on your tongue.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much. Yes, Serbia is top of my list once everything opens up. Thank you very much.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Take care. All right, let's bring in Zahir. We got Zahir, we got James, Bomeo, and Alan, and that'll wrap up the call. So let's keep this moving. Zahir.
How you doing, guys? How you guys
Good.
doing?
How you doing?
Well,
good.
Ukraine. I don't understand Ukraine. I mean, why in the world? You know what? This whole mess. Your European Union should deserve to be like it's on them too, though. Like in 2014, Merkel and then Prime Minister, what's his name? hold on. They had a like choice. They if they should have vetoed this whole deal, but Merkel did not. She went ahead like along with it. She thought that Putin and Russia will not do anything. But if that opposite happens, you know what? Merkel should deserve a blame here. I mean, she could have easily vetoed it, and lots of lives lost in this like conflict. They would have been saved without us. And this whole thing would not have happened without a single shot being fired. You know what I mean?
Merkel deserves a lot of blame for a lot of things, but Ukraine is definitely not one of them. Alexander.
I agree. I mean, I think Merkel did play actually a key role, and it was a passive role, and it was a disastrous one. Because you're absolutely right. When there was all that talk about an EU association agreement with Ukraine, and it was run by Poland, by Sikorski of Poland and Carl Bildt of Germany, Merkel, who ought to know better, she ought to know this part of the world. She speaks Russian. She was brought up in East Germany. She ought to have known this is an incredibly sensitive area for Russia. And the relationship between Russia and Germany and Russia and the EU is a critically important one. And she should have said, absolutely no. No way are we getting involved in Ukraine in that kind of way. And she didn't. And I think the reason she didn't is because, on the one hand, she didn't want to antagonize the very powerful pro-Atlanticist globalist people in Germany, to whom she is ultimately, let's always be clear about this, that's her constituency. Those are the people she is loyal to. She saw how they ganged up against Gerhard Schroeder, her predecessor as chancellor. She didn't want to take them on because always her priority is to remain chancellor. And the other thing is, she gravely underestimated both the strength of the Russian reaction and the extent to which Russia itself would be united behind it. And I say that because I read reports in the British media at the time, reports, by the way, which have now vanished without a trace from the internet. I've looked and I can't find them, but I clearly remember reading them, that at the time, directly after the Maidan events, she was actually advised by the BND, that's Germany's intelligence service, that if Germany imposed sanctions on Russia, if the EU imposed sanctions on Russia, Putin would either have to back down and completely give the EU the West what it wanted in Ukraine, or he would within months be deposed in an oligarch-led coup. And apparently, unbelievably, she believed it. Exactly. How stupid is that? But I remember reading it. I seem to remember it was in the Financial Times. You won't find it anywhere. It's obviously something that's vanished down some sort of oubliette, memory hole. We don't talk about it, but she was disastrously advised by German intelligence, which, by the way, I have been told by people who should know, by people who worked in the intelligence world, the US intelligence world, that is widely known to be one of the least impressive intelligence services in NATO. But she was very badly
intelligence, though.
Well, exactly, very badly advised. But she herself should have known better, and she let the situation arise, and there we are.
If I'm Merkel right now, like whatever time left in her, as a chancellor, if she wants to go down badly, or if she wants to go down, as a positive, I would tell Zelensky to either back off, or no EU for you. Like just completely cut him off from EU.
Yeah.
Well, did she do that?
Well, she could do that. I mean, absolutely. Again, if Merkel were to telephone Zelensky and say to Zelensky, look, we're absolutely opposed to the war in eastern Ukraine, you must pull your troops back. And if she were to do it that publicly, then of course there would be no war in eastern Ukraine. But then she would come into all kinds of criticisms from the Atlanticists and the globalists And
Who
you
cares?
care if you are Merkel. If you want to become UN Secretary General or President
You
of the
gotta be
World
kidding
Bank,
me.
well, that's very much the
Good
kind of
God.
people. That's very much the kind of people we're talking about. So
That's where
do
she's
bear that.
heading. That's where she's
Do
heading.
bear that. Do bear that in
Because the
mind.
thing is, Ukraine is not just Ukraine. You see, the thing is, it's not just the West is after Ukraine. Erdogan is after Crimea. Like, what the hell is his business there? I don't get it.
Yeah.
What the hell is he? He's just biting too much, and he's gonna fall hard.
Oh yeah, I agree. I think so. I mean, Zelensky is completely out of his depth. Always has been. I mean, he was never a convincing leader of Ukraine to start with. The fact that he became leader of Ukraine shows how desperate, in some ways, the situation in Ukraine has become, and how Ukrainians are looking at anybody, basically, who they hope just possibly might be able to lead their country out of the trap that it finds itself in. But
And that was one of the
Ukraine-
reasons Alexander Zelensky, correct me if I'm wrong, was elected, because he may not have been the best political operator. He wasn't a political operator, but he did promise to bring some peace to Ukraine, and people voted him on that basis.
Exactly so. And of course, he's now ended up doing the opposite, because he doesn't have the political gravitas and charisma and weight and force of personality and intelligence and guile in order to carry out the policy which he was elected to carry out, because he's not really a political leader at all. But that's the problem. And we come back to that point before. I think it was Dr. Bill who said, we're led by people, clowns in Washington, clowns in Europe, clowns in Kiev. And unfortunately, that is why we are in the crisis that we are in. An earlier generation of leaders, Helmut Schmidt, for example, Jacques Chirac, I'm not even going to go even back further to people like de Gaulle, they would never have involved themselves in a crisis like the one in Ukraine. They would have said, this is lunacy to get involved in something like that. But that's where we are, because we have the leaders that we do.
It's just the thing is that Zelensky right now has been backed by because Biden is just quiet. I don't think he wants to get involved in Ukraine because of Hunter Biden thing. But there's two leaders that are backing him right now: is Johnson in UK, and of course, I hate to say this, my own Prime Minister Trudeau. What a because there's too many. I'll tell you why. Here in Canada, this like in a Canadian Parliament, there are people that have Ukrainian background. For example, the Chrystia Freeland. You know, By the way, Chrystia Freeland, she's also what you call best friends with Nita Tenden. So yeah, but Chrystia Freeland, and there's another Canadian MP. His name is James Bazan. He's also a Ukrainian background and very anti-Russian guy. So there's a lot of like pressure on Trudeau to support Zelensky, and just that. And for one more thing, you see this Ukraine thing going on. China is looking at Ukraine. What are they gonna do? Are they gonna pressure Ukraine? Because if I'm China, I would be careful. I would be looking at Ukraine, because you know why? What the West is doing on Ukraine, they can do that to Taiwan, and China will not tolerate that. Well, do you get what I'm talking about?
Absolutely. China is watching Ukraine extremely carefully,
because same thing can happen with Taiwan.
Absolutely. And if you go to a program that I did on my channel a short while ago, it was very interesting actually how the Chinese very recently gave Ukraine a very careful warning about Ukraine getting itself mixed up in Crimea. And they basically said, keep away from Crimea. We don't want you to be involved there. China is a very important investor in Ukraine and in Ukrainian things. And is one of the countries that provides Ukraine with whatever kind of economic lifeline it has left. But ultimately, if it comes down to a crisis, China will back Russia. There's no question about that. In 2014, that wasn't the case. Today it is. That is the reality of the world today.
One more thing. Lots of supports for Ukraine here in Canada because here we have a thing called World Ukrainian Congress, and
Yeah.
because Canada has like the second largest Ukrainian outside of Ukraine. I believe Russia has the largest, right, population of Ukrainians.
Yeah. It's true.
So I guess yeah, lots of so we have like a World Ukrainian Congress is pressuring on Trudeau to like do
Absolutely.
something on Ukraine. Like
Absolutely.
they're telling him to like they're telling him to send his troops or air like for warplanes to Ukraine, something like that. No, that is
Absolutely.
not good.
No,
I
of
don't
course
trust
not.
Trudeau on this.
Absolutely, you're quite right not to. And can I just say also, I mean, it's a complete failure of Canadian foreign policy, which in the days of people like Lester Pearson and indeed Pierre Trudeau had a very high reputation. I mean, Canada in those days was a country that kept its in contact with all countries, and as a result, carried enormous weight in places like the United Nations and in international diplomacy generally, and that's all gone.
I just want to say this one thing: Russia is paying a price because of Boris Yeltsin's stupidity when he broke up
Well,
Ukraine, Belarus, and all that. This is
well,
all because of Boris Yeltsin in
well, that's
1921.
well, that's well, yeah, maybe, but as I said, that's in the past now. We have to deal with the situation as it is
Anyways,
today.
guys, I'll hang up and maybe I can speak to you next week, hopefully.
Thank you.
Alrighty,
All
guys.
right. So
Thank
yes,
you.
Thank you.
take care, Zia. Take care. Bye bye.
Mm.
All right. Let's bring in James. James, you're up.
Good morning here from Texas. How are you today, gentlemen?
Good, James. How are you doing?
We're very well, James. Thank you.
Thank you very much. First of all, I want to thank you, Alex and Alexander, for the solo expose that you made about Syria. It was quite moving. It's very important. The current situation in Syria is that the healthcare system in Syria just collapsed. And I don't know if you saw the crocodile tears from the Secretary of State from the United States, trying to help the children of Syria, which for me was just simply, posturing on his side. So the current estimate is that in the next 2 years, the total number of children that may succumb from famine, illness, or any other disease is estimated to be between 150,000 to 200,000 children.
Good grief. Good grief.
So correctly, this is from sources in Sueda, Al-Sueda, where the Druze community is located. They have been receiving an influx from refugees from all over Syria. Poverty, there is no gasoline, there is no heating oil. So the situation is completely it's extremely difficult for them. So what I envision clearly is that Secretary of State Belkin is going to become the new Madeleine Albright. Madeleine Albright sacrificed, quote unquote, 500,000 Iraqi children during the time she was Secretary of State in the name of sanctions. And she said it was worthwhile. And I think the repetition is going to occur here, in which, children from Syria are going to be sacrificed in the name of, the Joe Biden administration in the next 2 years. And it's clearly what it is. These are facts on the ground, and it's going to happen if there is nothing that Russia or any other country intervenes to ameliorate, the situation in Syria. And that's extremely difficult to, just to conceive and to imagine. So this is where we are in terms of, what is going on in Syria.
Yes.
And there is right now the situation is politically dead. You don't hear Syria anymore anywhere. No. Whatsoever. Not in the mainstream media, not with the Hassan Majdi or the MSNBC or the other people. And the only thing you hear is when the Secretary of State is, trying to, cry a little bit for the children of Syria. It's a blatant insult to the people with some real morals and ethical values, what they are doing. So this is where. So first of all, again, thank you very much for the solo expose that you made, Alexander. It was wonderful. Many people saw it, many likes. And people are waking up probably when they see you expressing your true political elements of what is political world chess game that is occurring right now. Syria, Ukraine, China with Taiwan, as the previous caller mentioning, Latin America, Mexico at the border, the situation, in Europe with the Nord Stream. This is a real world chess game in the financial system. And in my previous call, what did we say? What is the mantra of the financial people, the financial system? Is people are expendable. It doesn't matter where you are, what is the time. This is like a physics law. People are expendable. You can kill 500,000, you can kill 1 million. People are expendable. That's the way the system is all about.
Well,
so I want to first of all ask you, what is your take for the next 2 years when it comes to Syria, to the ongoing situation in Palestine, to the situation going with Iran? Do we see a breakthrough in the next 2 years or not?
Alexander, can I also ask a question of you, going off of James, and then we'll get to Alan and we'll wrap up the calls. Shouldn't we be most scared when things are so quiet? I mean, isn't it like, doesn't it make you a little bit nervous that something could be coming, i.e. false flag, white helmets, something? Anyway, just a thought. Go ahead, Alexander.
Absolutely. I mean, this is, and can I just say the Russian military have actually spoken about the very real possibility of some kind of a chemical attack, so-called chemical attack, being, shall we say, orchestrated somewhere in Syria within the next couple of weeks. There is said to be, and this is what the Russian military is saying, there is actually talk and discussion about this. And by the way, we mustn't make the mistake of thinking that fighting in Syria has ended. There's been a lot of fighting, especially in central Syria. ISIS attempted to revive itself there. That provoked very heavy bombing by the Russian Air Force and sweeps by the Syrian military, which apparently ended up containing the problem. But there is also fighting. There is also this suffocating situation with the sanctions. And I'm very glad this has been brought up, because this is really one of the most terrible things that's been going on. This attempt to strangle the country economically, and references to Madeleine Albright and what happened when these same policies were applied against Iraq. Well, Blinken, the new Secretary of State, recently tweeted in praise of Madeleine Albright. So it's exactly the same policy applied in exactly the same way. In that particular instance, when it didn't end with the collapse of the Iraqi government and of Saddam Hussein, the result was an invasion by the United States. And that possibility is always there. I don't personally think it's going to happen. I think the presence of the Russian military in Syria, it basically ensures Syria against that particular event. But be under no illusions, if the Russian military in Syria were not there, I am sure it would take place. In fact, there is no doubt it would have taken place. And it's always possible that when you have such a quiet situation around Syria, I mean, the fact that people aren't talking about it, well, then quite possibly something might be prepared also. So we shall see.
Sorry, one sec. I had, sorry, James, I had you on. Okay, you got the answer?
Yes. Thank you very much.
I was monitoring the chat. There's a couple of trolls that I wanted to get to. All right, James. Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Take care. All right, we got Alan to bring us home, and then we'll get to a couple of super chats, and we'll wrap it up. Alan, Are you
Hi
there?
guys.
How you doing?
Hi guys. Can you hear me?
Clearly.
Yes, we
Hello,
can.
Alan.
Right. Hello. It's good to see you. You're on top form. James's last question was very good. It's an outrage and a shame on the rest of us that this disaster is happening to the Syrian people. It's terrible. But what I wanted to ask you is, firstly, and I'll be brief, firstly, is the incompetence diplomatically of the new Biden administration proving to be a danger to the West and everybody else? And secondly, we've got imminent elections in Scotland and in London for a mayor, and we have got riots continuing in Northern Ireland, and I'm not getting any decent commentary or analysis in any of the British mainstream media, especially the BBC. Why is that? Thanks a lot. That's it.
Thank you.
Hey,
Thank
you
you,
have
Alan.
a good
Thank you, Alan.
weekend.
Thank you,
You
Alan.
too. You too.
We've
Take
actually-
care, Alan.
we've done a program on Northern Ireland. I think I'm not sure whether it's been.
Yeah, it'll be on either Saturday or Sunday.
Yeah,
Yeah, go
absolutely
ahead,
good.
Alexander. Yeah.
No, I mean, but you're absolutely right. We have elections in Scotland. They're going to be absolutely key elections because we've had a major political battle between the various leaders of the Scottish nationalist movement, Alex Salmond and Nicola Sturgeon. I should express an interest here. Firstly, I am somebody who very much wants the United Kingdom to hold together. I wouldn't be somebody who would be happy to see Scotland become independent, though if it does, that is their right, and I will obviously respect it. Now, I'm also someone who knows Craig Murray fairly well, and I've written in his support in terms of the court case that was brought against him. And, we've communicated, and he has his views about the situation in Scotland, and he's reported them to me at considerable length and told me things which I'm afraid I'm not able to discuss because they were said in confidence. But basically, about the situation in Scotland, there was this power struggle, which is unresolved between Nicola Sturgeon and Alex Salmond. There has also been a rise in pro-independent settlement in Scotland. It is quite likely, depending on how the Scottish elections work out in Scotland over the next few weeks, that we will have an attempt by the Scottish Parliament to have a second independence referendum. And it is possible that that referendum will result in a vote for Scottish independence. Now, what happens at that point is less clear because the British government probably will not recognise the legitimacy of that referendum. And at the moment, it doesn't look certain that other countries would do so either. So there could be a difficult political standoff, and it could very well be that Scotland will make some attempt to break away, and that might lead to greater tensions between Scotland and England and the government in London. We just don't yet know, but it's certainly an unprecedented situation, and it points to great instability in Britain of a sort we've never seen. We also have this happening at the same time that there is this situation in Northern Ireland, as Alex and I discussed in this program that is coming up shortly. I personally think that the parties in Northern Ireland will try to contain this problem and will not want it to escalate into a major crisis, because I don't think it is in anybody's interests that it should do. But I think that it's always dangerous in Northern Ireland when people riot in the way that they are. And perhaps more importantly, in England, what we're going to see is that the Conservative Party remains very dominant in England, that Keir Starmer's Labour Party is going nowhere, and that it is becoming increasingly a London party, a party of London. And London is the only place where, somewhat to my bafflement, we will see Labour doing well with Sadiq Khan being re-elected. I say somewhat to my bafflement because I will again express a view. I think Sadiq Khan is a terrible mayor and absolutely does not deserve to be re-elected.
Right.
And I think if we had a convincing challenger, either from the Conservatives or conceivably even from the Greens, but certainly from the Conservatives, he would probably be in serious trouble. But it seems that the Conservative candidate is not very effective and not very good. So the likelihood is we're going to get Sadiq Khan again, even though I think he's a terrible mayor, and lots of other people I know think the same. So there we are. Labour becoming essentially a party of London and a few university towns, Conservatives dominated in England, a political crisis in Scotland, a crisis in Northern Ireland. We don't look like a very united kingdom at the moment.
All right.
Right. Thanks. Thanks.
Thank you, Alan.
Yeah,
okay. I just one thing.
Yes.
What about the incompetence of the Biden administration?
Oh yeah, I think, yeah, you're quite right. Sorry.
Absolutely frightening what's happening, and it worries a lot of people.
And by the way, I agree.
Hello, Kamala.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, the most dangerous situation for any country is when it is led either by a fanatic or by a fool. What we are likely to end up with in the United States is a president who is both, in some respects, a fanatic and who is at the same time a fool. I cannot imagine a more dangerous situation for the United States.
Who are you talking about, Alexander? Which one,
well,
Kamala or Biden?
Kamala.
Yeah, both of them.
Both of them. I mean, it's. I mean, at the moment, as I said, Sleepy Joe, I think, is just ambling along. I don't think he's making many of the decisions. But before very long, I do generally believe we're going to have Vice President Kamala becoming President Kamala, a president who was not elected president, who's unpopular, who wasn't successful in the Democratic Party primaries, and who frankly has never shown any executive or managerial ability at all, who is extremely inexperienced in foreign policy, who comes with a very, very troubling set of opinions and attitudes and views, and who at the same time I judge to be completely incapable of running the presidency in an effective way. So, I mean, I can't imagine a more dangerous situation.
Right. Yeah, and China and Russia will wipe the floor with them diplomatically because they seem at the moment far more skilled.
Absolutely, as they're already doing. I mean, again, we come back to that awful summit in Anchorage when the Chinese wiped the floor. I mean, it was just with Blinken. I mean, I didn't know what hit him almost. It was quite awful to see.
Right, thanks, guys. Have a good weekend.
Thank you. You too, Alan. You too.
Take care. Yeah. All right, Alexander. We knocked those all out.
Yeah.
You knocked those all out.
We both did.
President Kamala Harris. President Kamala Harris. Unbelievable, She's going to be running the United States of America.
Well, indeed, absolutely, quite so. I mean, it leaves one speechless, but it's something we're going to have to get used to because it's coming. I mean, we can see it's clearly on the way.
At least you could say Joe Biden was vice president, at least, so at least he had some sort of experience. But I mean, it's unbelievable.
Absolutely.
Anyway, all right, let's get to some super chats, guys. Great calls. Great calls from Flying Boar. There was warnings in 2008 about Ukraine and Georgia joining NATO from Russia. How come Merkel didn't know about this in 2014? Merkel also vetoed George Bush's attempt to bring Ukraine into NATO in 2008.
Yes, I think what Merkel thought was that, the Russians will make a fuss if we bring them into NATO, but they won't be so fussed if we bring them into the EU, because the EU association agreement was about getting Ukraine into the EU. And once Ukraine was in the EU, one day it would have been made a member of NATO also. So she didn't want to take on the Russians directly. She didn't want to antagonize the Atlanticists and the globalists in Germany. So she went along with this EU association plan instead, which is also intended, by the way, to disrupt the consolidation of the Eurasian Economic Union, which the Russians were busy forming. And she didn't understand and didn't think the thing through. And when she realized in 2014 she had a crisis on her hands, she patched up the Minsk agreement with Putin, which she has since basically backed out of because she's done nothing to implement it. Merkel is the author to a great extent of this crisis.
Yeah, agree with that. From where at here? From Zariel. Zariel, hit that like button. Support the Duran. Thanks, gents, for another great weekend info round. Yes, hit that like button, everybody. Help support us. We're 493 likes. Come on, guys. Hit that like. Hit that like. We're working hard for you all. Hit that like. Let's get to 1,000. Let's see. Mark Hewitt, never mind Erdogan. Charles Michel's behavior towards VDL van der Leyen was interesting. Yeah, he didn't get up to give her a seat.
No.
He didn't help her out. Nothing. He just lounged back, and that was it.
I've actually discussed that in a program I'm done on my own channel, which is coming out shortly. Now, I think it was disgraceful behaviour and absolutely outrageous. It perhaps shows us what Michel thinks of Ursula von der Leyen. It would surprise me. I mean, but I also have to say, it's a point, by the way, I made on my channel, which is one of the things about the present EU and its arrangements is that there's always been this conflict about who is higher in the EU pecking order, the president of the European Council, who is, of course, Michel, or the president of the European Commission, who is, of course, Ursula von der Leyen. There's always been this little push-pull between the two, and there may have been something of that also. But regardless, irrespective of that, it was appalling behavior. I mean, it was absolutely shocking. Obviously, he should have stood up, let her take the seat. But in fact, what they really should have done, and if they'd had any self-respect, they should have, they would have not even, I mean, they would have done it instantly, is they should have said to Erdogan, terribly sorry, Recep, we can't carry on with this meeting. There aren't proper seating arrangements. Can you bring in a chair? And we can hold it. And
that would have been the proper diplomatic thing to do. Yeah,
absolutely. Exactly.
And don't, yeah, go ahead.
And if he hadn't complied, they said, well, in that case, we'll wait outside while you sort it out, because without it, we obviously can't have this meeting. But
and don't be fooled by any of the statements from Turkey that they followed protocols, that they knew exactly what they were doing. This was completely pre-planned. They knew what they were doing.
Of course they did. Exactly.
That's just the way they wanted to. They wanted to embarrass her, plain and simple. Embarrass the EU, plain and simple, and it worked.
Exactly.
So, all right. From Rainy Steps, keep up the great work. Thank you very much for that super chat. Rainy Steps from Brave New Perth. Will we see the disintegration of Ukraine? Will Ukraine be split into two parts? Will Russia focus on Eurasian integration? What will happen?
Well, no.
A lot about these things.
A lot of things. I mean, we have indeed. I mean, can I just say? I mean, the possibility of Ukraine breaking up is something that has been talked about lots by many people. I mean, Ukraine minus Crimea is basically three regions. It's the eastern regions, which are Russian-speaking. There's the central regions, which are Orthodox but Ukrainian-speaking, and then there's the western region, which is Ukrainian speaking and Uniate Catholic. So they're very different. They're very different outlooks. It's never really cohered properly as a state, and it's been dominated to a remarkable degree by the very strong anti-Russian attitudes you find in the Western Uniate Catholic regions of Ukraine, even though in population terms that's the smallest of these regions. But there we are. Now, whether that will happen, whether it will break up in that way, we don't yet know. But if there's a war, if there really is a war that's being talked about, it's a distinct possibility. So that's one possibility. Eurasian integration is something that the Russians have been pushing very hard. And to be very clear, it's happening. Central Asia is now very much becoming locked in to the Eurasian economic community that the Russians have created. It's also becoming locked in to the larger Eurasian project that the Russians and the Chinese are working on together. China is very big now in all the various Central Asian states. Uzbekistan recently joined the Eurasian Economic Community as an observer, and it's only a question of time, I think, before it becomes a full member. And of course, Belarus, where Lukashenko had been trying to pursue an independent policy. Well, after the crisis there last year, he's had to push back to the Russians also. So we're going to see Eurasian integration continue. At the moment, it's purely economic. There are political aspects to it, but perhaps some form of political construct will emerge there also. It will not be the Soviet Union, as some people, Hillary Clinton and people like that, talk about, but it will be a group of economically integrated states. They will remain independent states. China and Russia will be the dominant partners, and they will try increasingly to draw other countries into it, like Iran, like Turkey to some extent, perhaps even one day, who knows, even Afghanistan, if things there ever sort themselves out, which is possible, I suppose. So Eurasian integration is reality. Ukraine breaking up is a reality. But how it will all turn out, what the sequence of events will be, that we will just have to wait and see.
All right, from Toilet Sauce, Slovakia complains about a certain medication after the Russians predicted a month ago that this information campaign would take place, yeah?
Absolutely. And the Russians are utterly furious about it. And they said to Slovakia, well, in that case, if you're going to make all that fuss about these medications, well, you can hand them back because you're clearly in breach of contract and we're not prepared to work with you in that case. So we will see how that turns out. The weird thing about that is that that's going on at the same time as Germany seems to be negotiating with Russia to try to get the same medication provided to Germany directly and bilaterally, going round the EU institutions. But there we are. The Russians did predict there would be a campaign against it, and they were, of course, right. I mean, I don't think you needed much insight to work out that that would happen. By the way, I understand that the the European Medical Agency, which is the Medicines Agency, which is the EU institution which is supposed to be regulating these things, is taking an incredibly long time to decide whether or not to license the particular medication in question, and that we probably won't see any co-production agreements in the EU happen for at least a year, if it even happens then. So, frankly, I don't think the prospects of this particular medication in the European Union area are very bright unless Germany does what it seems to be trying to do, which is cut some kind of bilateral deal with the Russians over it. Alex, are you there? Hello?
Hello.
Yeah.
I'm back.
You're back.
Yes, I'm back. I'm back. With another super chat. Will Ukraine use their drones against Russia?
Oh, well, they will try. I mean, there's a war. They will try. But exactly. Well, they will try. But I mean, one mustn't make any comparisons between the Armenian air defense systems in the Caucasus that were found wanting and the Russian ones. The Russian ones are at a completely different level of sophistication. I would add that the Russians have had to deal with drones on a very large scale in Syria. They came up against Turkish drones in Syria at the beginning of 2020 when there was fighting there. And the Russian air defenses showed then that they could cope with Turkish drones. So they'll be able to cope with Ukrainian drones too. Of that, I have no doubt.
Okay, we have a super chat from Gromit Mug. Bit of pop culture question here. Did Netflix overdo it by making Philip very cold and adversarial in The Crown? Or was that fairly accurate?
I haven't watched The Crown. What I will say about Philip was that he was a famously blunt, outspoken, sometimes extremely rude man. He was also a very private man. His only really strong personal bond was with the Queen, and perhaps some say with his first son, with Charles. So it's not impossible that he was, distant, but I don't believe that he was, I mean, I haven't seen The Crown. I wouldn't be surprised that, it's been wildly overplayed, what sort of a person he was in private.
I've got another Crown super chat actually too, Alexander.
Yeah, really.
So this is obviously a popular show. From Robert, 1999. Just finished The Crown on Netflix. Just finished The Crown on Netflix. I'm drawn to their portrayal of the former PM, Harold Wilson. He seemed impressive, populist, and cares for his country. A class of politician no longer exists. Can you comment on him?
Yeah, I remember him. I remember Harold Wilson. He was the Prime Minister of Britain when I actually came to live in Britain in 1968. And of course, he was then re-elected in 1974, and he was Prime Minister again for about a year. So I remember Wilson very well. Very gifted, very skillful politician, extremely brilliant. He was academically, apparently, one of the most outstanding graduates that they had in Oxford University when he graduated in, I think, economics way back in the 20s. I mean, very gifted, very clever man, very skilled in using television, very, very subtle in politics. I think it's fair to say that he was just one step below greatness. I mean, he was not the kind of political leader that you look back and you remember and you say, well, he was a remarkable person. I think he was very talented, but somehow just missed that ability to be a great leader, to really shape politics, to change things. Britain did change a lot during the time when he was Prime Minister, but it was very much on social lines. I mean, this is the time when there were a lot of social reforms, lots of relaxation in, mores, a lot of the things that we associate with the 60s. Personally, I've heard he was very conservative, didn't actually like much of that happening, wasn't really involved in making it happen, but it did happen whilst he was Prime Minister. So yes, a gifted man, a likable man. People tell me in private, a very kind man, a person who was not always wise in his choice of friends. He became involved with some very corrupt people, but was personally himself not corrupt, had an odd relationship with his secretary, Marcia Williams, who many people thought he had a relationship with, which he probably didn't, by the way, despite what many people think, but who certainly did have a very powerful influence over him, and somebody who was not in the end quite the great, powerful, effective Prime Minister that perhaps on the basis of his intelligence and his abilities and his political skills, he should have been. Certainly, though, far more impressive than the people we have now.
And The Crown seems like it's a popular show, so maybe we should.
Well, maybe
I
should watch it.
Maybe I should watch it. Maybe I'll find a way to get it.
Nor me either, by the way.
No. Yeah. All right. From Asavet MD, $20 super chat. Thank you very much, Asavet MD. Where am I here? Magnesia Shan. Alexander, do you think there is a highly eccentric Austrian moder who is making our lives unlivable?
Well, Austrian. Why specifically Austrian? I ask. I don't know. I'm not. I'll give a pass to that.
Is there someone making our lives unlivable?
I
Soros
think.
type.
Oh, George Soros type. Well, possibly. I mean,
that's me. That's me saying a George Soros type or Bill Gates type.
Well, Bill Gates type. I think there's a group of people. I think they're making our lives less livable, and they're making it very, very difficult, actually. And the thing that is so difficult about talking about the present age is that we've discussed the terrible weakness of political leadership, but that does make one wonder where decisions, such important decisions as are being made nowadays, where exactly they're being made. Who knows?
All right. Thank you very much for that super chat from Ali Toot, £10 super chat. Get your gold, silver, and crypto. Wish you would cover Africa a bit. Love you.
We should.
Anyway. Thank you. Welcome.
You're quite right. We should cover Africa more, actually. Lots going on in Africa.
Yeah, I've got a lot of articles sent to me for South Africa as well.
Yeah,
there's a lot of stuff going on there as well. It's a lot of news to cover.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, that's partly the fact, actually, that whenever we want to think about looking at other places, something happens like Ukraine at the moment, and we find ourselves drawn back to it. But there we go.
Yeah. We'll figure out a way to get it all done.
Yeah.
Let's see. I lost track of where I was.
Yeah.
Just finished The Crown. We did that one already. Slovakia, we did that one. You did that one. There were warnings. Flying Boar. Yes, this is where we are. There were warnings in 2008 about Ukraine and Georgia joining NATO from Russia. How come Merkel didn't know about this in 2014? Oh, no, we did this one, didn't we?
We did.
Yes, we did that one.
Absolutely.
We did that one.
Yeah.
Oh, boy. Let's see. Flying Boar. Merkel didn't read the EU agreement. It said Ukraine has to follow European military, and that is NATO.
Exactly. You're absolutely right. I mean, she didn't read it, or probably didn't read it. Certainly the Ukrainian president himself, Viktor Yanukovych at the time, didn't read it. And of course, the Russians did read it, and they pointed out to Yanukovych the implications of what he was about to sign. And then the poor man, he tried to pull out of it. And of course, the rest is history. It was an extraordinarily bizarre idea. They tried to pull the wool over the eyes of the Russians. They tried to pull the wool over the eyes of many people, and it just didn't really work out.
Yeah. From Gregory Casey, €10 super chat. There's not a hope in hell that Ukraine can become a member of the EU. Its economic indicators are so completely off the scale that they'll spend 30 years trying to comply with EU structures and fail.
Well, absolutely. And in fact, again, anybody who knows about the situation in Ukraine would have known that. But of course, that wasn't ultimately the agenda. It was never about the EU, or rather, let's be very clear. It was about the EU, but not about sorting out, making things better for the people of Europe. It was always all about this geopolitical game that these globalists and neocons always play, and which always gets us into a terrible disaster.
Yeah. Why do you even want to be part of the EU at this point?
Well, exactly. Well, what you said at the start of the channel. I mean, at a time when everything was going horribly wrong in Europe, the Ukrainians wanted to join and rep their own.
It's just gotten worse.
Yeah.
It's just gotten worse in Europe. So I mean, it's a blessing to not be part of the European Union. It's a blessing.
Yes. Yeah.
Absolutely. Flying Boar. 3 Baltic countries. The Russian population there have no rights. They don't. Yeah. Well, why don't they immigrate to Russia? Are they allowed to immigrate?
So a lot of them have, in fact, done so. So I understand, but you're absolutely right. Well, people, it's a lot to expect or ask of people that they should quit their homes and their lives and give up on where they are. And people often stay where they are and try to remain in their homes and countries and hope one day for better days. And maybe they will come. But you are absolutely right to bring this topic up. the Russian-speaking populations of the Baltic states face extraordinary amount of discrimination and pressure. And of course, the EU, which is so loud about talking about rights of minorities in other countries, just ignores it. And not just the EU, but the Western media and all the rest. It depends very much who you are when whether or not the West notices you.
Yeah.
If you're Uyghurs in Xinjiang, you get lots of attention. If you're Russians in the Baltic states, you get none.
If you're Navalny, you get lots. If
Absolutely.
you're Assange, you get none.
Exactly.
From Flying Boar, update on Nord Stream 2. It's 95% complete. When
Absolutely.
will it finish?
Well, this is a constantly moving story, actually, because we've been told that it'll be ready or finished very soon. And I get the impression it's been the Germans who've been dragging their feet over it. Partly, I think, because they've been hoping to do some kind of a deal with the Biden administration over it. I mean, they wasted a whole year. I mean, to be very clear, work could have started, restarted on Nord Stream 2 last summer, but it was postponed. It's now restarted. The latest word is that it will be completed around September and that it will be in operation by the end of this year. And pipe laying is apparently going on, and we will see. Of course, if there's a war on in Ukraine, then all bets are off, and it might not be finished at all.
That's the plan for the globalists. Yeah. Let's see.
Yes.
Let's see if it works. Magnesia Shan, ZAR 100, King Goodwill, Zweletini Zulu passed, personally cleaned the cups and shirts of his daughters. May the spirit of goodwill be upon us.
Indeed, absolutely.
Thank you very much
for
that super chat.
Yeah.
From Anatoly, hello to you both. About who is making our lives unlivable. We know where they are. They are the Paris Club, the London Club, and the Club of Rome. Still trying to find more information about them.
Good. Well done. Yeah. Well, I think you've identified
Paris, London, Rome.
Paris, London, Rome. Yeah.
You were going to say something, Alexander?
No. I agree. I agree. I think that's exactly right. That is exactly right.
Everything happens in London.
Everything happens in London. Always so. Yes. Very interesting city in some ways. Britain is an interesting place because somebody once said to me that it's like a Chinese box. You enter one part of it and then you discover that there's another part, and you need to be incredibly well connected to get through all of them, to get to the center. And London is very like that. And by the way,
city of London, I imagine.
Exactly. And by the way, Oxford University, where my wife was at one time an academic, it takes that even a step beyond that. Finding the place where real decisions are made in Oxford University, which is of course the place where the British elite gets trained, is an even more complicated story. But there we go.
Which is more prestigious, Oxford or Cambridge?
Well, Oxford is where the politicians come from. Cambridge is perhaps more prestigious in the sciences and in certain of the art subjects. So it also depends a lot which particular college you go to. So there's the universities, but also particular colleges within the universities are particularly prestigious. So if you talk about New College, Oxford, for example, might be more prestigious than one of the less well-known Cambridge colleges. But I would say if you talk about international rankings, I think Cambridge is a little higher in academic rigor. But as I said, Oxford is where the politicians go.
Interesting. Where was Halper? He was Cambridge, right?
I think he was Cambridge. Yeah, I think he was Cambridge. Yeah.
He was Cambridge. All right. From George Casey. Since the Treaty of Lisbon, EU's External Action Division was pursued entirely deranged policies, never even considered prior to adoption of that treaty.
Well, absolutely correct. And that's entirely right. And can I just say, the quality of people who have been leading the EU's diplomatic efforts has been abysmal. I mean, was it Catherine Ashton who started it? And she was awful. She was the person who was, in charge at the time of the, the Maidan events, I seem to remember. But I mean, they've all been, frankly, inconsequential people. Mogherini, Borrell, really.
Mogherini, Borrell, yeah. Boy. All right, from they get worse and worse with each.
They get worse, yeah, absolutely. Iteration, yeah.
All right, from Flying Boar. If Merkel leaves, who will lead the EU? Macron? I don't like this.
No, I can't believe that he will. Actually, I don't think in the end Macron has the vision to be he has the vision to lead the EU, but I think he has the ability. And I think also something else about Macron, I think a lot of people don't like him. I'm talking about other EU leaders. I think he would probably find it very difficult to lead the EU. The place where people, I think, would still look to for leadership is Germany. But Germany is in a mess politically. It's not at all clear who the next chancellor is going to be. Armin Laschet, who is the possible successor to Merkel as head of the CDU party, is apparently unraveling. And it's all very unclear. So it's quite possible that in a few months' time, there will be no leader of the EU, which would be unsurprising and very typical of the situation that we now have.
All right, we got one final super chat here. Guys, hit that like. Please hit that like. Let's get to 1,000. From Flying Boar, update on Belarus.
Yeah, well, at the moment, Lukashenko has completely seen off the political challenge that he faced. He's now very close to Putin. They're talking almost continuously. There's now increasing talk of industrial cooperation. And I think basically the situation in Belarus is both stable and the country has been reoriented to Russia. So that big attempt that was made last year to drive Lukashenko out has failed, and all it has achieved is to consolidate Russian influence.
Refocus on Ukraine. All right,
yeah,
that's it. We got everything, I think.
Yeah.
We got it all. Calls, super chats, even Discord. Alexander, any final thoughts as to what's going on?
Well, I think April is going to be the month of Ukraine. If we don't have a war there within the next couple of weeks, some people talk about early May, but I don't really think it's going to be possible to keep this sense of tension running that long. But we will see anyway. I think if we don't get a war within the next 3 weeks, chances are we won't get one. But we will see what happens. Certainly, we will be following it. We mustn't be completely focused on Ukraine. Lots going on around the world, and Syria certainly is hotting up. And of course, there's people talking wildly about wars with Taiwan also, which I don't believe either, by the way.
Okay. You don't believe Taiwan either?
No.
No chance.
But no chance. That's my own view anyway. I don't think the Chinese are going to launch an attack on Taiwan. I don't think it's in their interests to, and I don't think that's their plan.
All right. Let's hope we don't see any wars. Yeah. Guys, thank you to everybody who joined us for this live stream. Great live stream, great questions, great calls. Thank you to everyone that's donated to us via PayPal, via Donor Box, via Patreon, Subscribestar. Thank you to everyone that's bought Duran shirts. I'm wearing my Hungary shirt, Alexander.
And I've got my US. Scotland. And I've got my Scotland.
Yeah, that's my US Magic mug
right
there. And what else? We have videos coming out. You mentioned Northern
Ireland, exactly. And we've got other ones too, all sorts of subjects. I've even got one of my own channel about Sofagate, but we got lots of videos.
That's right. Alexander's got one on Sofagate. We've got one on Northern Ireland coming out. We got one on Hungary, Italy, and Poland forming an alliance. Guys, you're going to want to really tune into that video. So look, everybody, when you get our videos or notifications, share them out, because YouTube is really cracking down hard on just about every single independent content creator, big content creators as well, even like Louder with Crowder got removed for like a week or something from YouTube as well. So they're really cracking down on us. So this goes back to Zariel's call. It's tough.
Absolutely.
It's tough
very
with
tough.
These guys. Yeah. All right.
Absolutely.
but we're trying. We're working hard. That's it for
Absolutely.
this live stream. Have a great weekend, everybody.
Weekend.
Take care.